And be sure we stay pretty good about that, guys. We've got a few, a little bit too long of being off camera in the last few sessions. So for some folks, so let's make sure we're good about being on video. That does count against you. I don't want that to become an issue later in the course. So try really hard to stay full face on video during our 50 minutes of instruction every hour. The moderator is very mean. Okay, let's see. Well, let's do a little bit of review. We had a pretty interesting chapter 2 with some weird legal terms. So let's go ahead, and you won't hear me say this too often, but pull out your phone. Go ahead and get your cell phone out and dial in to go to your browser on your phone, or it could be another window on your computer, and go to Kahoot.it. Kahoot.it. Looks like that. Kahoot.it. Once you go there, it'll give you a place to put in a pin. Say again. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Keeping me in check. There we go. That's what I need you to see. That's right. You know, life gets you just where it hurts every time. So there's a couple ways you can join the Kahoot. Go to Kahoot.it, either plug in that code. You don't have to use your actual name if you don't want to. This does not count for points. It's just the experience of review. You can also try that QR code. That might be a quicker, easier way to join in. And I'll give you some time to log in, and we'll do just a little bit of a review game that all the kids are doing out there in the schools. These are questions I made up based on chapter 2. Go ahead. Oh, good. You're familiar? Something about the music and the competition aspect, I think. What was it called? GIMKIT? I will. Okay, I'll look that up. Is it a gamification kind of thing too? Nice. I will check it out. Found out about Kahoot, right? The first year I started teaching, so I've been occasionally putting together some things. If you drop out, the instructions are at the bottom of the screen, and you can hopefully get back in action. But again, even if you can't answer because of some technical glitch, you'll be here. You'll see it on screen. The benefit of it is the seeing and the explanation of the answers. So it all kind of works out. Got a couple more folks yet to join. Give you some time to do that. Let me work on getting this screen a little more visible. There we go. Nice. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Keel, go ahead if you haven't logged in, be working on that, and you can join in along the way if need be. So let's take a look. Estates in real property. Hopefully you can see this okay. The question will be on the screen. The answers will be on your device. Tenants by the entirety is required for married couples. True or false? Tenants by the entirety is required for married people. The timer is set. I think I've got it set to 30 seconds, maybe 20 for some of these. And the point system is derived from a combination of right answer plus time of response. So the faster you are and the more correct you are, the higher your points will be. If you're wrong and fast, that gives you some pretty good points too. So got a pretty even split. And that's what I typically run into. The first night or so, understanding this stuff gets a little tough. It's a little difficult because we just throw so many things at you. So tenants by the entirety, let's think about that. Is that for married people, or does it have this thing called a right of survivorship? Tenants by the entirety. Is that right of survivorship that's included in tenants by the entirety? Tell me, either speak up or tell me in the chat. Either one is fine. There you go. You got it. Exactly right. Tenants by the entirety is only for married couples. The other two out of the three are available to everybody, including married couples, as you stated. Those are joint tenancy and tenants in common. I don't want to steal my thunder. I don't remember. It's been a while since I wrote these questions, but I might have given you an answer to an upcoming question. Let's see. See how we're doing. Good job. All right. Starting out strong. Next question. Another true or false. In joint tenancy, if one owner dies, her spouse inherits her part of the property. True or false? Joint tenancy. Spouse dies, owner dies, the spouse inherits. You know, word choice might be confusing here. The word inherit is probably not the best word to use. It is true in joint tenancy that right of survivorship is in effect and happening. So it is the spouse that's going to get it, but probably shouldn't use the word inherit because it kind of might be a little confusing. But joint tenancy and tenants by the entirety both have that feature called right of survivorship. That's what makes them attractive. And then if you don't want that, though, the test question might say so-and-so wants to leave her portion of the property to her heirs. If she dies, she wouldn't use joint tenancy. She wouldn't use tenants by the entirety. She would need to use tenants in common if that's her goal of owning her piece. All right, I got to shake up already. Here we go. The right to use the property's resources to reasonably maintain the property is called what? The right to use the property's resources. I'm not sure if we hit that word just yet in our coverage. We talked about reversion. Estovers is another word. Remainders. Pour aut v is another one. We did talk about the fact that in a life estate, the life tenant, the owner, cannot clear cut the property, but they are allowed to use enough resources to pay for fuel and pay for repairs. So good job. I think maybe process of elimination or reading ahead might have saved the bulk of you. Estovers is the right answer. That is what it's called when you have the right to use the property's timber or resources to maintain the property. Well done. That's some good test strategy there too. You knew what those other three were, so by deduction, maybe that's what helped most of you get that. Oh boy, here we go. The type of fee simple defeasible that requires continued use, must keep using it as a farm, for instance, is called what? Which of the two kinds of fee simple defeasible? Fee simple defeasible determinable. Well done. Good job. Fee simple defeasible subject to, that's the other one that is a version of defeasible, but it's the one that says you cannot use it in a certain way. So however you need to remember that, I just think of must not use it. The word not stands out in my head for some reason, and I equate that with the longer version of the two names. Sometimes we use silly ways to remember things. Oh, by the way, winner of the game gets $500 from your neighbor. Just let us know how that goes, collecting that from your neighbor. In Pour Out V, the person's life that determines the life tenant's duration of ownership is the what? It's called the what? There you go. Not too difficult. The measuring life, the lifespan that is being measured to dictate the duration of that ownership. That's the measuring life. Well done. The life tenant in a life estate can chop down trees on the property in what situation? For what purpose can they chop down those trees? Can they sell every single tree if they want to? Or can they only cut enough of them to use for repairs as needed? Or to raise money for the remainderman? Or to use for his fee simple, defeasible, defensible, subject to riparian rights? I hope it's not green because I don't even know what that would be. We just threw all of the words at you. Life tenant in a life estate can chop down trees in order to use them for repairs. For raising money for repairs, for fuel for repairs, that is allowable. They can't sell every single tree. That would be called wasting the property and not allowed because they're a life estate. They're not allowed to do that. What is it called when one person owns property by themselves? Just one single owner, not multiple owners. All the single ladies. There you go. Ownership in severalty. Several. Sever. Sever is the word to focus on there. Single. One owner. I know. I do that on tests all the time. And so it's to the point when I don't really have to take tests too often, but when I take the practice tests, I just kind of roll with it because I've found that, I've talked to people though, some get it right the second time, the second try when they second guess. So you just have to take a deep breath, really just clear your mind and just think it through. And don't be quick to change it, I think. Really make yourself earn it. If you're going to make a decision to change it, make sure you have a really good reason. Sometimes it's those words, right? In the Notion application, I've got the red flag words, and those kind of help. Okay, what are typically confusing words? As we get into more chapters, I'll give you those words will make more sense. But like provisional broker compared to just plain word broker, got to be real careful about which one it is. So I feel your pain. What is a right or privilege that runs with the land called? There you go. An appurtenance is something that runs with the land, right or privilege that you get just because you buy that piece of land. That's called an appurtenance. And bundle of legal rights, I can see that being a confusing answer, but the point of that right or privilege running with the land is kind of what the point of this question was. So appurtenance is the word for when it runs with the land. Real estate, real property includes a bundle of legal rights. That is true. But that bundle of legal rights runs with the land, and that is called appurtenant. Like an appurtenant easement, an appurtenant driveway easement, for instance. Conventional life estate is where the owner retains ownership as long as what? long as we both shall live, as long as another person lives, as long as she, the life tenant, lives, or as long as the grantor lives. There you go. As long as the life tenant lives, the life tenant and measuring life are the same person when it comes to a conventional life estate. The grantor would be the seller, and that's not a thing that happens. The measuring life is never that seller. If 3 joint tenants own a condo and one of them sells her portion to a friend, the new owner is also a joint tenant. True or false? Wow, even split. It's just going to be a straight up memorization. You might want to make charts. There's a handful of topics in this course that are useful to make out and kind of write out some charts, like the day after or the week after something we cover when you're reviewing. Just try to think, okay, what do I know about freehold estates? Make that chart I showed you. Try to recreate it without peeking, right? Don't look at it. Try to recreate it and then see what you missed. So another chart you might make are the 3 forms of concurrent ownership: joint tenancy, tenants in common, and tenants by the entirety. And so one of the features of joint tenancy is that it has equity of ownership. And another one is that you have to buy it at the same time in order to be considered a joint tenant. So if you get into this buy in later after the original purchase, then you are not a joint tenant. You're a tenant in common. The other original ones who bought it last year are still joint tenants, but you're a tenant in common. Conventional life estate owner can legally sell their property. Conventional life estate owner can legally sell their property. True or false? If that's what you have as a life estate, is that something that you can do with your life estate ownership interest? Another even split. So conventional life estate, the measuring life is the same as the life tenant, right? What can you do with a life estate, whether for the life of another or conventional life estate? Now, while it might be difficult to find a buyer willing to put up with that limitation of only owning it as long as some measuring life person is alive, can you? You still can. Yeah, you still can. If you can find somebody who's okay with owning it just as long as they are alive, as a measuring life is alive. So it is possible to sell it, possible to rent it, possible to mortgage it, use it as collateral if you can find people willing to work within the constraints of that life estate. One of the tenants in common wants to sell his portion. He must get permission of his co-owner to do so. True or false? If you want to sell your part and you co-own with somebody, do you have to get their permission to sell your share? Good job. They do not have to get permission of their co-owners. They have the freedom to sell their portion if they want to. So essentially, you could start owning it, you and your friend, and you could end up owning it with a whole different person that's a stranger to you, because your friend doesn't have to ask your permission. Now, it might be nice for them to, might be courteous, but I guess first they might want to ask you if you want to buy them out, but they could legally sell to someone else. And now you're a partner with somebody else. Water rights for property along rivers, streams, or lakes are called what? Good job. Riparian rights are about rivers, streams, and lakes. They might be navigable or non-navigable, but they are always rivers, streams, or lakes. Non-tidal, Tidal. Littoral rights are about bodies of water so big that they have tides. They are impacted by tides. That's oceans. It also could be large lakes. The mean high water line is something we ran into just to kind of cover the other possible answer choices. But that's what you own in a literal water rights situation. You own to the high tide line. Fee simple determinable, that means the owner must not use the property in a certain way, is what? Which fee simple determinable method means the owner must not use it in a certain way? There you go. The long one. Fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. Well done. Threw in a nonsense one. Fee simple fructus naturalis and fee simple do not go together. New land acquired by water receding is called what? When water recedes and adds and reveals new land for you, what is that called? It is called reliction. Reliction is adding. Think about it this way. We're getting more land, or are we losing land? Losing land is erosion. That's one of them. Avulsion is the other way we could lose land. That's in like sudden methods or a sudden kind of event. Reliction is the gaining of land because water is like in a drought, like pulling back. Nice. I love it. Whatever works. I might get arrested if I try to use that one in class, but I love it for whatever you need to use it to. Remember, that's good. You won't ever forget it. That's the key. If a couple wants to buy a condo and own it in a 60-40 split, they should pick what form of tenancy? Tenancy in common, true or false? If you own property with someone else and you want to own it in unequal shares, tenancy in common is the one for you. That allows for unequal shares. Joint tenancy typically is only equal shares. If it's three of you in joint tenancy, you're going to be 33 1/3 apiece. Two of you, it's going to be 50-50. But tenancy in common allows for unequal amounts. The highest type of ownership recognized by law is what? What's the best one that we would prefer? I don't know why Ron Swanson is eating pizza off of a bush in a field. I don't remember why that was relevant, but it's a great gif. GIF? Good GIF. There you go. Fee simple absolute. That's the way everybody should always own everything all the time, if you can. It's best for the owner, best for the buyer. Which form of ownership is not favored in North Carolina? Who owns property in the form of cannabis tenancy? Maybe not in North Carolina, maybe in Colorado, maybe California. That's how they own property there, I guess. Tenancy and conundrum, joint or concurrent. There you go. Got a little bit of everything. Sometimes we pick things because they're fun. Which form of ownership is not favored? Joint tenancy is not favored in North Carolina. It's possible, but the attorney would need to write it up in very specific language determined by previous case law. We tend to not do it. Most people who aren't married are going to own as tenants in common. Most people who are married are going to own as tenants by the entirety. Last question. Here we go. Literal rights are for properties along what types of bodies of water? You ever held a dog over a toilet? You never thought you'd hear that question in a real estate class. They do that. Don't they start paddling their feet? It's adorable. I was playing with some friends' kids, and I held a 3-year-old over the water, and she did the same thing. She started flapping her little arms and legs. Okay, yep. Oceans and large navigable lakes with tides. It's about tides. Literal rights are about tidal waters that have tidal behavior. There you go. Good job. Who won? Who gets the $500? Sheena gets $100. Corey gets $300. Christy gets $500. Yay. Go to your neighbor at the break. Tell them that I told them they've got to give you the money, and let us know how it goes. And speaking, well, no, we're not time for break yet. Sorry. Almost gave you a break. It's the least I could do, right? Okay, let's get into, oh boy, how do we follow up a fun quiz? With math. Let's talk about some math. What a jerk. There we go. We had gotten into property tax last night as we were all exhausted and ready to think of anything but numbers. And thankfully, it's one of the easier types of math. It introduces the circle formula or the T formula. And so we learned about the dates and the timetable. And tell me when the tax rate, if it's going to be changed, when does it get published and you find out the new tax rate every year? When might that happen? There you go. Yeah, July. Well done. July is when that tax rate could take place. What about the tax bill itself? When is it due and able to be paid for the first time any given year? What date? First of, I'll give you a hint. It's the first of a certain month. There you go. Okay, I'm seeing it in the chat now. Yeah, September 1st is the first possible date you could pay that property tax. And it runs all the way to December 31st. You got it. Well done. Sorry, I'm cleaning up my display here. What about when the tax lien is filed on because of unpaid taxes? What date is that? There you go. January 1st for that one, you bet. And when can a property that has a lien on it be listed because of the lien? No, there you go. Yep. Okay, I'm seeing some of those. Yep, the 31st. January 31st is when the property could be listed for sale. So let's take a look at it there. There they are. September 1st, due and payable. January 1st, lien is put against the property. January 5th, a deadline to pay those past due taxes, and the property is listed January 31st. We talked about mill rate. We started out with mill rate. So let's get into that again. If the area, the municipality, the city, the town you're in, does anybody happen to know how you're handled, how tax rates are handled in your given area? Is it dollars per hundred or is it mill rate? If you happen to have ever heard mill rate before because you know you pay taxes in that way in your area, let me know. I haven't met anybody yet, but there are some towns in North Carolina, I think in the middle of the state in particular, that still use mill rate. It amounts to the same decimal though. Whether you're going by mill rate or dollars per hundred, you're still ending up with the same decimal number. So it looks like this. if a property was taxed at 14 mills, then it's mills, so you know you need to divide by 1,000. So you divide that 14 by 1,000, and the decimal that you end up with is 0.014. Or if it's a town that doesn't use mill rate, but instead uses dollars per hundred, let's finish out the phrase. It's dollars per hundred of the tax value. How many hundreds are in the tax value? If you went to a bank and said, give me $100 bill for every $100 in my tax value, how many Benjamin Franklins would you have? That's the idea, right? So we're taking that tax value and literally dividing it by 100. What happens in the calculator? Is there a button, like a single button, that accomplishes the goal of dividing something by 100 without having to type 4 times? Can you just hit one key? Yeah, Misha says the percent sign. Yeah. And so when it's dollars per 100, you can save yourself 3 milliseconds because you don't have to punch in 3 times on the calculator. You can just hit it once. But don't mess up and think you can do that on mill rate. There is no percent sign that does it by 1,000. Percent literally means per 100, per cent, cent, like centenarian, 100-year-old person, or 100 cents in a dollar. Cent is a word fragment that means 100. And when you say percent, you're dividing it by 100. So if we take $1.40 per $100 of tax value, we're going to divide that 1.4, that $1.40, by 100. We're going to say 1.4 and percent sign in your calculator. That's going to move the decimal over 2 places instead of 3 like it happened at the mill rate. And look what happens. $1.40 per 100 is the same number in decimal version as 14 mills because we're just moving the decimal over 2 places instead of 3. You still get 0.014 there at the bottom. So which one is going to be used? It'll just show up in the test question. And you'll just need to know which way to handle it depending on what the question says. If you see the word mill rate or mills, you're going to immediately think divide by 1,000. If you see the phrase dollars per 100, well, it's telling you what to do right there. Oh, I need to divide by 100. I need to per 100 it or percent it, right? So we left off talking about mills. And so the first step in the case of 14 mills, assessed value of 257, was let's convert the mills to decimal. Divide it by 1,000 to get the 0.014. Carry that over to this other T formula. And this time multiply the decimal version of the mill rate by the assessed value. When you do that, we get the number 3598, and that is the annual tax bill. And that's what they're asking for. Does that make sense? This is just kind of repetition, right? It's all about doing a lot of practice problems. Even if you just make them up yourself, make up like 10 of them. Come up with 10 different assessed values, come up with 10 different mill rate numbers, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, any of those as mill rates, whatever you want. But those are more like a realistic number. And then just see how much the property taxes would be depending on those different numbers. It might look something like this. There we go. In this case, let's say we've got an assessed value of $200,000 and a mill rate of 9 instead of 14. We had 14 in the example. Let's just do 9. I tend to consolidate those 2 T formulas. I don't write it 2 separately. I just say, okay, 9 mills, and I'm going to divide it by 1,000. So in the interest of saving all that time, since it's mills, we can't use the percent sign. We just have to plug it in like a savage and put in 9 divided by 1,000. Then I'll write 0.009. As you get more comfortable with this, you might even skip that step of writing it out. You might just use the calculator and say, okay, got the 0.009. Now let's multiply it by the 200,000. And boom, there we go. Our annual tax bill in this situation is $1,800 a year. Let's compare it. What if that same house at 200,000 instead of 9 mills were 15 mills? If it were over across town, like 3 different towns away, maybe they charge more. Their tax rate might be higher. What's it going to look like? 15 mils divided by 1,000. The decimal would be 0.015. We don't have to write all this out, but in the interest of just keeping it straight in our heads, now we multiply that by the 200,000. And so a tax is for the same assessed value house in a town, three towns away, is going to be $3,000 a year instead of $1,800. So you can see the relationship there. As the mill rates go up, or as one of these two numbers on the bottom goes up, the top number goes up too. Also, it is true that as one of these numbers on the bottom goes up, the other number goes down. So you'll notice that as we do more and more T formulas. What's next? Let's see this one. This time we've got the it's the same assessed value, but this time we're using the dollars per 100 method for determining the taxes. The tax rate is given in dollars per 100. It's $1.27 per $100 of tax value, or assessed value, same thing. And so we take that $1.27 divided by 100 to get the decimal 0.0127. Then we multiply that by the assessed value to get the 3263.90. Of course. Which one do you want? Mill rate or this one? Exactly. You got it. Exactly. Yes, we're dividing the mill rate by 1,000 instead of, in this case, we're dividing this dollar something by 100. Exactly. Yep. Step 2 is always multiplying the decimal version of the tax rate by the assessed value. Step 1 is going to depend on which way they do taxes in that town, which way they handle a tax rate, mills or dollars per 100. In this case, since it's dollars per 100, we're literally dividing by 100. It's right there in the name of it. Mills is weird looking because nothing in mills really makes sense unless we just remember it the way I was talking about. I remember it like a million is 1,000 thousands, and those are 3 zeros, and so 1,000 has 3 zeros, so divide by 1,000. But that may not make any sense to you. But none of them is divide by anything other than either 1,000 or 100. And so this one is definitely divide by 100 because it says so right there in the tax rate. So therefore, the other one has to be, mill rate has to be dividing it by 1,000. Let's look at this one. This time, we've got to do an extra step. Sometimes, thank you, that's nice to know. Deborah says mil is 1,000 in Spanish. That's all I needed to know. I will use that forever. The assessed value might be given to you not as a number, dollar number, but as a percent of the actual market price. And that brings up the importance of the terminology. If it tells you market value, that's another way of saying sales price, at least for the purposes of our class and our test. Market value does not mean tax value. It means sales price. By the way, in a reasonably appreciating kind of a market, the tax value is typically not the same as the contract price. You usually sell a property for more than what the tax value is on that property, if it's an appreciating kind of area that's doing pretty well. And for the most part, across the board. So market value means what did it sell for? In this case, market value is $574. If we were to take that 574 and multiply it by the tax rate, we would get the wrong answer because we need to do a step first. We need to convert that 574 market value into the tax value or assessed value. Anytime I say tax value, think assessed value. They're the same thing. So we're going to need to get 85% of 574 to locate the assessed value, and that's all we're doing here. Multiply 85% times 574. And that gives us an assessed value of $487,900. We okay there? Now that we have our $487,900, we can move forward, find the tax rate if they give it to us in the problem, and determine the annual taxes. But this is all they asked for here. They just wanted to know what's the tax value in dollars. It's the percentage that they give you times the market value. So here's what a bigger question could be that involves all of the last things that we've talked about. The first step would be using that percent. If they say the assessed value is 90% of the market value, you're going to need to do that first to find the assessed value up here by multiplying that percentage times the market value. Now we have assessed value number in dollars. Now let's do the mill rate math. They tell you the property is taxed at 9 mills, as we'll see on the next example. Use that 9 divided by 1,000 to come up with the right decimal number. And then we're just going to multiply those two things together to get the annual taxes. So it looks like this. The assessed value is 85% of the market value. The market value is 574. So let's do that step right now. 85% of 574 is 487.9. Next step, the tax rate is 9 mills. And so 9 divided by 1,000 is 0.009. Now we have our decimal version of the tax rate. Multiply it by the answer we got from the first step we did. And those two things multiplied together gives us the annual property tax bill that we owe. So we just had to do an extra step here. We had to calculate the assessed value instead of just work with one that they gave us. So watch out for those terms. If you see a percent like this, you're going to think, okay, I might need to do that step where I use the market value to calculate into an assessed value. Are we okay? Make sense? Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, for sure. Let's do one. I'll give you one right now, pulled from air. There we go. Okay, this time, let's say the assessed value is 90% of the market value, and the market value or sales price is $675,000, and the tax rate is 8 mills. What is the annual tax bill? Let me change the answers in the chat. So when you're ready, you can go ahead and put your answer in the chat, and you won't give it away. So I'll give everybody a little bit to come up with it. And when you're ready, just put a number in to the chat. Let me know that you got an answer. Looking good. Seen a lot of similar answers. I have no idea. We're going to do it together in a minute. Okay, what's our first step? Can we use the 675 as the assessed value? That's not the assessed value, is it? So if we were to make that mistake and put in 675 times 8 mils, we would get $5,400. And that doesn't work because the assessed value needs to be calculated. We need to determine what 90% of 675 is. So that assessed value is 607,500. Now that we have that number, we can plug it in, make ourselves a little T formula, put in our mill rate down here at the bottom also, and a little note that we need to divide it by 1,000. Let's divide that 8 by 1,000 and get 0.008. Multiply that by the 607,500, and there's our annual taxes. Good job. Do another one. This time, get the chalk dust on my hands. Sorry, that's an old guy joke. All right, this time our our assessed value percentage is, let's say, 65%. The market value is $240,000. Tax rate is lucky 13 mils. So what's the annual tax bill in this situation? Got some answers coming in. Good job. Okay, let's look at it. So we know that we need to take our market value, multiply it by the 65%. That gives us $156,000 as an assessed value. We're using 13 mils, which we divide by 1,000 for a decimal of 0.013. Then we just multiply those two together. $2,028 per year is our tax obligation. Is that pretty good? Locking it in. Steps, just steps. 1, 2, 3. Most of the math is like 3 steps, maybe 4. Sure. You mean like, tell me more. What do you mean by finding the market value? You mean like we just did, but do another one? Oh, yeah, sure. Let's do... No, try again. Oh, you mean like do the math in the other direction? I gotcha. So I get you. I think what you're saying is this. Ignore the part above. So our last answer for annual taxes was 2028. Would they ever say the annual tax bill is 2028 and the assessed value is 200,000, therefore what is the mill rate? Yeah. They could. They could certainly, and that's a great question. They could absolutely do that. That's why I like this T formula, because if you just know it and where the things go, it doesn't matter if they switch it around. You just need to know where on the formula to plug it in. So in this case, we know these two things, the annual taxes and the tax value. So 2028 divided by 200,000. I think I did the wrong thing. Let me do that again. 2028 divided by 200,000 gives us a decimal of 0.01014. And so we just need to move this decimal over 3 spaces, and that looks like approximately 10 mils. Because if we moved the decimal to the left 3 spaces to get the decimal we needed, if we're going in the other direction, what's coming out of the calculator is a decimal. So, other direction. 0.01014 times 1,000. Yeah. So our mill rate would be 10.14. I don't know, because we don't do that in the Charlotte area. I don't know if mills are ever in like more in between 10 and 11, like a 10.14, or if it's always a whole. I wouldn't be surprised if it is, because if you just think about it, they're just adjusting the tax rate to handle their budget. So I could see them wanting to get a little more specific. But that's all you would do. In that case, you're just going to do this division. You're going to end up with a decimal, and you're going to need to convert that decimal back to mils. And if we converted mils to decimal by dividing by 1,000, then we convert decimals to mils by multiplying. And that's all I did. It could also be this. 2028 is the annual tax bill, and the mils are 12 mils. So how much is the assessed value? And so in this case, again, we need to convert the mils to a decimal before we can plug it in the calculator. So let's get that 12 into decimal format. So again, this is the same number. It's just the decimal version. So don't let that freak you out. $2,028 divided by the decimal version means our assessed value would be $169. And we could go a step further. If the assessed value is 90% of the market value, then how much is the market value of this property? Oh boy. Now we need to take this 169 and reverse engineer it into a market value if it's 90%. I'm debating whether or not to do that with you yet. I don't want to confuse the issue, but we are literally going to do something that will require a very similar step later. But let's just let this absorb for now. And then I will go back and cover that when we get to that little math nuance later. But this is enough, I think, to kind of get set in our brains. Sure, of course. Okay, we did you do anything with the 70% number? There you go. So we need to, you just got a little carried away, a little eager. You wanted to hurry up and do that rate times assessed value thing, but we needed to get the right assessed value first. And so the 315 is not actually the assessed value. The 315 is the market value. So we needed to do this multiplication first. Take 70% of 315. To get the tax value, or also known as the assessed value. And so the assessed value is $220,500. Now we take that number and multiply it by the tax rate. So we do that times the 7 mils, which is 0.007, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, that's the decimal. So our tax bill is $1,543.50 per year. Oh yeah, we'll do this a lot of times. Is there a particular sticking point? Yeah. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, of course. Let me do this one thing first. Let's add a little sort of a series of steps to remember when it comes to this. And you can maybe create a pad or a page with steps involved with every given math problem. So in this case, okay, yeah, we're making a new one. Let's say the assessed value is 95%. The market value is $530,000, and the tax rate is, let's say 6 mils. So step one. Find the assessed value. And you do that by multiplying market value times the percentage that they give you. In this case, 95. I'll give you another one. Let's walk through this one together with these steps, and then I'll make up another one for you guys to test yourselves on. And so that gives us an assessed value of $503,500. Step two. Convert the tax rate to decimal. So that applies whether it's mil rate or dollars per hundred. Either way they give you it, you still need to convert it into a decimal. So in this case, you're going to go 6 mils divided by 1,000 equals something that somebody put in the chat, that it's all coming to me, so you didn't see it. But Joseph recommended a simple way to convert mils to a decimal is to just take those mils, in this case 6, and throw 2 zeros in front of it, because that's essentially moving the decimal over 3 places. And then if you want to see it in the calculator, 6 divided by 1,000, there it is, 0.006 is the decimal version. And then finally, step 3, multiply the decimal version of the rate times the assessed value. To get the annual taxes. Yep. That's it. The light bulb moment. I love it. All right, this time, I don't know if that's too small. I'm trying to leave the little steps out there to the side. So let me just give you new numbers here. And I'll say the assessed value is, we'll go 95% again, 95% of market value. The market value is, let's say, $950,000. And the tax rate is 10 mils. Using those numbers at the top, go down through those steps and tell me what the annual taxes are. Oh, thank you. Well, I'll let you work on this and I'll make up for the extra break time. So when we're done with this, you can go ahead and take your break. I'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll hit the clock for the break. Sorry, say it again. You're breaking up a little. You said, yeah, sure. There's a bit of a lag, but hopefully I can hear you. Or you can feel free to put it in the chat, but you can also maybe dial in with your phone and connect with your phone for audio. And then I might be able to hear you a little better. And that's okay to do. Because it's kind of breaking up. That sounds pretty good. Just say it now. Tell me your question. Yeah. Yep. Like where to put things in the T formula? It's still breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry. Let me do this. Here, let me... Gotcha. That's good to think about. That's good to know. I can, yeah. But I put in the, oops, sorry. I sent that to the wrong person. Joseph just got a monster text from me. Let me change it to everybody. There you go. So there's a variety of phone numbers. If we still have trouble, you can dial in to one of those phone numbers on your cell phone and choose audio, use the audio of that. But try again and let me see if I can hear you long enough to get the question. If you guys want to go ahead and take a break, I'll go ahead and start the clock there. So we'll start our break now. Yeah, it's like a 11-digit number up here. It was asking for the meeting ID. And when you connect, just leave that connected. And I got to check on some puppies real quick, but I'll be right back here in just a few minutes. Okay. Coming up on a minute to go. Okay, first of all, how are we doing, Giovanni? Did you get logged in with the phone for audio? Okay, good. Can you hear me okay? And can you say something? Let me see if I can hopefully hear you better. There you go. Sort of. It's still kind of coming in and out. Okay, you're coming in and out on me. Can you hear me? Oh boy. Okay. Let me go back through and explain it, and maybe that'll clear it up. I can't quite hear you long enough to get the actual question, but maybe if I kind of go back through it another time, it'll clear things up. And I don't mind handling it at the break or even after class tonight. We can stay and figure it out. And if you still have questions, is that okay? How do we do with our practice problem here? Plugging it into the steps. We could take that 95% and that market value, multiply them together as we see here in step 1. Market value of 950. Oops. Times 95% gives us an assessed value of 902,500. So there's that one. Step 2, fix the mill rate. Get that into a decimal version. So we could do it this way. If you didn't have a calculator, 10 mils is the same thing as 10.2 mils. And we just go 1, 2, 3 spaces over, put a decimal, fill the space with a 0. We can confirm it on the calculator. 10 divided by 1,000. And there it is, 0.01. We can get rid of all this stuff, and we end up with the number 0.01. Now that we have both of these things, we just multiply them together. And so obviously we're doing kind of linear algebra here instead of using the T formula. So whatever works for you, right? You just know that the assessed value times the decimal version is going to give you that annual taxes, in this case, $9,025. How we feel about that? Make more sense? Give you one more to do by yourself, and then we'll do some dollars per 100. Assessed value is 80% of the market value. The market value itself is $430,000. The tax rate is 7 mils. How we doing? All right, what do? We're going to take that 80%, use it and the market value to come up with the assessed value, 430 times 80%. And that is our assessed value number 344. That's the tax value upon which your taxes are based. Now we're going to take that mills divided by 1,000. If that whole stuff about moving decimals and zeros doesn't make perfect sense to you, then just put it in the calculator. There's no sense not using the calculator. It's right there and you'll be 100% confident. So 7 divided by 1,000 gives us 0.007 as a decimal. And now we're just going to multiply those two things together. And there's our answer, 2408 annual taxes. Any hang-ups? Any sticking points? We okay there? Now let's switch gears a little bit. This time, I'm going to do something quite similar, except I'm going to use dollars per hundred. So we've got the assessed value. I'm just going to give you the number this time. 175,000 is the assessed value. We're not going to do the percentage thing for a second. The tax rate, I'm going to give you a little curveball here. The test question might say this: the property is in the city limits. And so the tax rate for the city is 0.075 per $100. And the tax rate for being in the county is 0.06 or 60 cents per $100. What's the annual tax bill? What's the annual tax due? Got a city rate, got a county rate. We're dealing with dollars per hundred. This property is in the city limits, and the assessed value is a 175. I'm not going to give you market value. I'll just go ahead and take that off the table so you know tax value or assessed value is 175. What rate are we going to use in this case? We have to recognize, like, let's say that's the county map, and here's the city within the county, and the property is in the city. And so we know that the city rate is 0.75 and the county rate is 0.60. So when it's in the city limits, you are also in the county because the city is physically located in the county. You're going to have to use them both. So if it's in the city limits, you got to add these two together. And 0.6 or 60 cents plus 75 cents. Oops. Is $1.35. So the tax rate we're going to use for this one is 1.35 per $100. Does that make sense why we used them both? Because the city limits is where the property is located, and if you're in the city, you're also in the county. So you're going to have to pay taxes to both. And so the taxes of both of those combined is $1.35. Now, how do we convert that $1.35 into a decimal version? There you go. Divide it by 100, not 1,000. You could also utilize the handy dandy percent sign on your calculator. And so that gives us the decimal 0.0135. Now, what about our assessed value? How do we calculate that? Well, we don't, I threw you, I was just being kind of a smart aleck. We don't have to calculate that because I gave it to you. So we could just plug that one in there. But you're ahead of the game. So the 0.0135 times the 175,000 means $2362.50 is our annual tax bill. Exactly. You will never only use the city rate. You'll never only use the city rate. You can't, if you're in the county, then you're not in the city, and so the city rate is irrelevant to you. But if you're in the city, you can't be in the city without also physically, geographically being in the county. So you add them together. You'll either add them together because you're in the city limits, or you'll only use the county because you're outside of the city limits. Questions? Put something in the chat if I can't hear you and you have questions. Let's do another one. This time the property is outside the city limits. And the city rate is 0.9 or 90 cents per hundred. The county rate is 0.65 or 65 cents per hundred. The tax value or assessed value is $315,000. What's the annual taxes? It's outside the city limits. So step one, if they don't give it to you, but they did here, but if they don't, you're going to have to calculate the tax value or the assessed value. This time we are good. They just gave us the assessed value of $315, so we don't need to do that step. Second step, figure out the tax rate. In this case, do we use both of these rates? No, we only use which one? Just that county rate. So now we're just plugging and playing. 315,000 times the rate of 65 cents per hundred. We need to divide it by 100 real quick. And that gives us 0.0065. And that multiplied by that 315 It's an annual tax bill of $2,047.50. Notice something in all of these examples. The tax rate is always a much bigger number than the annual taxes. I mean, some of you might say, well, of course it is. But sometimes we get so bogged down in the math that we see something because we maybe hit a button too many times and it just doesn't even make logical sense. So just think about real life. If you end up with an annual taxes of some ridiculously huge number, like 6 digits, you probably did something wrong, because rarely are annual taxes that much. If you had like a $200,000 annual tax bill, then this tax value better be in the millions, right? So keep in mind the perspective, the relationship. This down here is always a big number that's going to be bigger than the one up top, no matter what the problem is. Anytime we're dealing with a circle formula, the number on the top is smaller than that one of the numbers on the bottom. And then the other number on the bottom is always some kind of a rate, either a interest rate for your mortgage, that's a rate, or in this case, a tax rate. And we'll see several other, but it's basically always like that. Big number on the bottom, smaller number on the top, and the rate is the other number on the bottom. Any recurring problems? If there are, just let me know at the break and we'll work through them. All right, let's see where we stand. Here's one with dollars per hundred and the city and county rate together. We just did them, but let's just sort of walk through it. The assessed value is 75% of the market value. The market value is $497. So first step, let's figure out what the assessed value is in dollars. $497 times 75% gives us $372,750. That's our assessed value that we're going to use. Next, what do we know about the property? Keep reading the whole question, and we find out the house is located outside the city limits. So do we even need the city tax rate? We don't. So we can just pay attention to the 67 cents one. So 67 cents divided by 100 is a decimal of 0.0067. Multiply that by the assessed value. Our annual tax bill is $24.97. We okay? Looks like that. Again, the city rate, the county rate, got to know how to know which one. You either use both or you use just the county. And remember, mill rate's divided by 1,000, dollars per hundred is divided by 100. And then the formulas, if you're better with math this way, the old-fashioned kind of linear way, that's okay. Use what works for you. The T formula works for people that need that visual element. But here they are. Here's all the math written out in a horizontal way. Market value times the percent of assessment gives you the assessed value. The assessed value times the tax rate gives you the annual taxes. If you need monthly taxes instead of annual taxes, you got to find the annual ones first and then divide them by 12 to get the per month taxes. And then if you need the daily taxes, which we will later on, chapter 21, then you'll get that annual taxes first and then divide it by the number of days in a year. For you, 360 days in a year for this class. You can screenshot it. You can write this down, but it's all in the Google Drive as well. Oops. Let me do something. Don't look at this. I'm going to hide it. There we go. So do that on your own, and then I'll reveal the answer. Oops. Darn it. Sorry. Here, we'll do it that way. Nope, we'll do it that way. Okay. Sorry, guys. So in this case, we've got a market value of 675. We've got a tax value that's 85% of market value. We're going to need to multiply those together. Then we're going to get the mills converted into a decimal. And then multiply all of that together. So 675 at 85% is 573,750. And then, there we go. And then 573,750 times the decimal version of the 12 mills is our annual taxes of 68.85. How we doing? Pretty good. All right, don't look. I'm going to do it one more time. And this is the last one. There we go. Here's a new one. Here's the last one. This time we've got city and county. Need to know which to use. And I'll let you take it from there. Well, since they give it to us in dollars instead of the word mills, that's the indicator. Yep. Yep. All right, let's take a look. Since it says the property is in the city limits, we need both. So we're going to add the rates together, treat them as one rate. 0.23 plus 0.98 gives us $1.21 or 1.21. And that's the rate we're going to use. So we divide that rate to get the decimal version, divided by 100. We need to get an assessed or a tax value using the 70% and the market value dollars. So that gives us $514,150, which we multiply by that decimal rate. And it's $62.21 and 22 cents. Don't forget 22 cents. That's it. The good news is this: the rounding errors or the rounding differences will not give you a wrong answer. In other words, they won't give you multiple choice answer options that are only a rounding error apart. So whether you leave the number in the calculator or clear it out and write it back in as just two of the many decimal places that they might have given you, it's not going to, just pick the closest one. They're not testing you for math proficiency. They're testing you for real estate. So rounding won't mess you up. Okay, let's, if you still have some questions, we'll talk about it at the break or after class. But let's move on into chapter 4. Let me take care of a little detail here. There we go. Okay. Chapter 4 involves transferring title to real property. What's that mean? It means selling it. And that's what we're here for, right? That's why we're getting this license, to help people accomplish this exact goal. This is pretty important stuff, right? So we need to know what's involved with transferring titles to property. Just like selling your car, you sign the title over to the buyer. You're going to assign the deed over to the buyer of your property. So we're going to learn methods of transferring title. How is it done? What are the essential elements of a deed? The legal essential elements. What are some different types of deeds? What are excise tax? That's another math exercise. It's pretty simple. I'll give you the spoiler. You take the price, you divide it by 500. You round up to the closest dollar. We'll do it together. It's the easiest math we do. We'll talk about the title insurance process, how to obtain title insurance, what the attorney does to search for title problems, to do a title search. Here's a $5 vocabulary word. The process, or the act of selling your property. What are you doing when you're selling it? You're getting rid of it. You're distancing yourself from it. You are alienating yourself from it. So the word alienation is the legal term for selling your property, because you are separating yourself from your property, as a out of space alien is separating themselves from their home planet. So transferring your property is alienating yourself from it. This will pop up again in chapters 14 and 15 when we examine and find out this thing called an alienation clause that the lender puts in place, which says, if you sell your property, we want all our money now. Lender's not going to let you sell your property and then keep making them payments. You're going to have to take those proceeds that you got when you sold your property and pay the lender back everything you owe, the entire loan balance. So that's called the alienation clause. That's what is in place to make sure that happens. And you agree to when you sign the deed of trust. Describing land is pretty important. Got to make sure everybody's on board and on the same page with what land it is you own, what real estate, what real property you own. You can't just call it any old thing. Hey, it's the property with the big tree in front. Oh, that one. That's the one I'm selling you. No, that's not quite going to be good enough. We need to get specific. It's not even good enough. Follow me here. It's not even good enough to use only the street address. The street address, this is a testable question. Street address is not a legal description. Street address is not a good enough description of the property. It should be used, and it is. There's a place for it in the sales contract and the listing agreement. So you don't not use it, but it is not an official legal description. We're going to learn what legal descriptions are. It's an exact description of the real estate that's suitable for legal purposes. So street address is an informal reference. It is not a legal description. Describing the land with the legal description is one of the essential elements that must be in the deed. There are a handful of essential elements that should be in a deed. They have to be in a deed for that deed to be valid. We can't consider it a valid deed unless these essential elements are in there, and this is the first one. This is one of them. Making sure we're talking about the right property. If somebody's buying property, they want to make sure it's the right one. So, there are 3 ways that we can refer to the property that are considered a legal description for North Carolina. North Carolina, the methods on top are the 3 acceptable methods or versions of a legal description. The best one possible for both North Carolina and all of the original 13 colonies along the East Coast, plus Texas, all of these states, but most importantly for us, North Carolina, uses what's called the meets and bounds description. Meets and bounds is by far the best method of legally describing property. Let's talk about that one, and then I'll refer back to these other methods. Here's what meets and bounds looks like. And this is ancient, guys. This goes way back to when we first were formed, when people said, let's call this North Carolina. It goes back that far. And so think about those times. A meets and bounds description back then would literally be a paragraph somebody wrote. And they said, starting at the corner of the stream and the road, Old Town Road, walk southwest 3 degrees. I mean, they're using a compass, and they're listing and writing down distance and direction. Guess what? The words meets and bounds literally means distance and direction. Meets like meters, that's distance. Bounds, what direction are you bounding in? The dog bounded across the yard. So bounds is direction, like how many degrees, what angle in relation to north, east, south, and west. So 13 degrees southwest for 300 yards or 300 feet, however it may be, that's a piece of a meets and bounds description. And so back then, and even now, you start at a point called you're going to love it, point of beginning. That's going to be hard to remember. The point of beginning is where you start. And with meets and bounds, you have to end at the beginning point. In other words, it has to be a closed shape. It can't be an open shape. You got to have an end point at the exact same place where you started. So you're describing the entire boundaries of the property. And so, as we'll see here, we've got both versions. We have a map version on the right, and we have a written or word version on the left of the same property. So the paragraph version, beginning at the northeast lot corner, thence, oh boy, we got some old English words here. South 16 degrees, 42 minutes, 22 seconds. East, then 100 feet. Then south 33. Good news is, I'm just showing you what the paragraph looks like. You do not have to dissect it. You don't have to write it. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. When you see a paragraph like this with these degrees and marks and hash marks, all you need to know is, oh, that's meets and bounds. That's it. You just need to know meets and bounds is the primary method for legally describing property, and you need to know the relevant terms associated with it. So, relevant terms of meets and bounds, distance and direction, because that's literally what meets and bounds means. A point of beginning, that's another testable phrase that is associated with meets and bounds. A point of ending, and then you can see how it translates to the survey or the drawing. They're following, as they've written the paragraph, they're following it here on the map. And it ends up in a closed shape. You can kind of see that the dimensions of each side are written there too. The far right side of the property here is 168.4 feet. The back line is 100 feet. The front line is 156.01 feet. You might see these things on a survey or on a tax record or on a recorded plat map. Recorded plat map. It's another thing we'll run into. So this is meets and bounds, still used, started with the colonial days. Here's the terminology for it, the testable terminology: point of beginning, point of ending, or ending point, Monument, that's another word that's important for meets and bounds. That's where the changes of direction occur. So every place over here where we're changing direction, each point on this shape, there's some sort of a monument. Back in the old days, that might have been a big rock. It might have been a stream. It might have been an intersection, crossroad of two roads, or a big barn or a tree. Today, we're a little more sophisticated. Those points where the directions change, what do we think? Tell me in the chat. Any guesses? What would be a smart way to put a placeholder in the ground physically so that we'd know that we're changing direction in the lot? Yeah, there it is. Corey says put a stake in the ground, not like a wood stake, an iron rebar piece of metal that's going to be around a while. They drive it into the ground. When you see the wood stake with the flag on it, that's not the property marker as far as what's in the ground. That is just showing you where the stake is located that has been driven in the ground. Yeah, you see them in the road too. You'll see those stakes driven down in the road. So that's where the directions change in modern day. So a surveyor will use a metal detector if they need to find some of those metal stakes in older property that they just can't find it, right? So point of beginning, point of ending, monument, meets and bounds. Those are the terms you need to know related to this particular form of legal description. And there it is. There's the monuments everywhere. The directions change, all the points of the shape. There's the distance and direction, the meets and bounds, and there's the point of beginning and ending. So what are some terms associated with meets and bounds? Good job. You got it. That short-term memory is going strong. Well done. Now, let's look back again. Meets and bounds was the first one, the one we liked the most. There are two other kinds of legal description we use in North Carolina. A reference to a recorded plat map. What's a plat map? Well, it's a visual representation. It's like a survey. It looks like a survey. But it's a survey of the entire area or the entire neighborhood, and it shows where on that neighborhood map this lot is located. It gives you which block, which portion of the map, and which lot within that block it is. It might say lot 37 in block E. We'll see one of those examples in a minute. And then the other way that we could legally describe property is a reference to a prior recorded deed. Basically, we could say, look at that deed dated from 3 years ago for this property. There's a legal description there. It hasn't changed. Same one. Refer back to that deed. And the way we refer to a prior recorded deed is with what's called a book and page number. Because think of it this way. See if I can show you oh, I know. There it is. All right. So if you go physically to the courthouse or wherever the government building is in your town, you'll see a room like this. That's a gentleman I know. His name is Steve Medlin. He's an attorney in Concord. Been around a long time, and he is at the Register of Deeds office. You can see there are documents in the rack behind him. I believe the actual room related to where he's standing is over here off to the right. And if you go through into that room, you'll find a whole bunch of black binders, sort of like legal size binders, landscape oriented legal size binders. And you open them up and you can turn to whichever book. By the way, first of all, it's bunches and bunches of shelves of these binders. So first thing you need to know is where is the plat map, or where is the deed, or whatever it is that has been recorded. What page is it on, in which book? First thing you need to know is which book. It's book 37. Okay, let's go find book 37. We got it. Which page? 311. So book 37, page 311 is where the whatever it is you're looking for is recorded. That's a reference to a recorded plat or a reference to a prior recorded deed. There we go. So that's what that is talking about, a reference to a prior recorded deed. That's the physical location. By the way, guess what? You can access all of that right here, right now. So maybe after tonight, after our class is over, because you'll have nothing better to do, you're not going to want to watch TV or relax or eat or have something to drink. While you're doing that, pick the county you're in and look it up. Google it. Whatever county, let's say, oh, I don't know, randomly pick a county. Let's say Pender County. There's a Pender County in North Carolina. That's all my ancestors. I'm just kidding. Pender County ROD, Pender County Register of Deeds. If you Google search that for whatever county you're in, you'll end up in the Register of Deeds online website location, and you can do a search. Plug in your street address or plug in your neighbor's name. You can get all up in everybody's business of what they own, what they have recorded on the public record, and kind of see a lot of things, because it is. If it's recorded, it's public record. Now, those are the three methods that we use in North Carolina. What do they do in the other states? Because the way that we do in North Carolina is similar to what all the original colony states do, but the Midwest and the West, all those states do it a different way. Thomas Jefferson and those guys in those days, they said, look, we've got more and more settlers that are going out to the West, risking their lives to claim property. How are we going to keep it organized? How are we going to say, oh, this guy owns this piece? And they created what they thought was, it's a very organized method, but it's called the Government Rectangular Survey Method. Government Rectangular Survey. And has anybody ever flown over the Midwest from here to, say, California and looked out the window? You see grid patterns, don't you? That's the Government Rectangular Survey. It's set up in grid patterns. So every town, every city is in a grid, and I'll show you how that works. What you need to know for the test is more the vocabulary related to the Government Rectangular Survey, but what you won't see is the Government Rectangular Survey in the state portion of the exam. They will test you on it to some degree, just knowing the words, but just on the national portion. Here's what it looks like. It's developed in the 1700s to establish a system in the New West. We don't use that here. That's another testable question. North Carolina does not use this method. We use one of those other three, but not this one. When we come back from break, we'll dig into it and kind of see how the Government Rectangular Survey method works. So go ahead and I'm going to start the timer, and we'll see if anybody has questions, and then I'll put the most recent time whenever I'm done helping whoever might need help. So go ahead and start your break now. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes, and I'll put up the clock here shortly. Giovanni, are we okay? Did you dial in, or do you still have questions about anything? I saw the thumb. Okay, good. Okay, just let me know if something changes. I'll start that timer. I'll see you back here in 10. rectangular survey method. Government rectangular survey. Okay. Terminology. There is a grid, and it's positioned north and south. So top of the page there, north, bottom is south. The lines running north and south are called meridians or range lines. The one in the middle of this particular township, because that's what we're looking at, we're actually looking at a whole grid full of townships. If you look in the upper right corner, that green box of little boxes, that's a township. Think about back in those days, 1800s, towns were little, right? Towns were small, like old westerns. Come into towns, town's not big enough for the both of us kind of thing. So the township is situated with other townships in a grid pattern. So there is one in green. There's a little tiny orange square in that green square, and that's important, and I'll point out what that means in a minute. But that's how the grid is formed, by the north-south running lines called meridians and ranges. The one in the very middle is the principal meridian. And then east and west, horizontally, those lines are called the baseline and tiers. So the baseline is this one in the middle. So the very dead center middle is made by the principal meridian running north-south and the baseline running east-west. Then all the other horizontal or east-west running lines are called tiers, T-I-E-R-S. They run east and west. The other north-south running lines are range lines. Ranges and meridians go north-south. Baselines and tiers go east-west. The township itself, again, this little green square in the upper corner, that's one. That is a township. And right next to it is another one. And next to that is another one. So in a given township, it's a little grid in and of itself. If you'll notice and count them, there are 6 sections going that encompass. It's 6 by 6. It's a square that's 6 miles by 6 miles. That was the size of an original town or township. 6 miles this way, 6 miles this way. If we look in the upper right corner, that one is labeled number 1. Because that's always where they started. In every town, the upper rightmost corner square is the first one, is square number 1 in that particular town. Then they go from right to left, 1 through 6. Then it just goes over 1 and then back in the direction they came. You know where they got this method from? Think about what makes sense. What do we do? How would we, what is a thing that might happen that would make sense for you to go all the way down to the end and then just go over a little bit and come all the way back? Instead of going down and then back and then over and then down and then back. What does that sound like to you? If anybody does any sort of outside work or has watched any sort of outside work being done, in modern day, it might be like the way that you mow the grass. But back in those days, there wasn't a lot of grass. They made every acre count and they planted crops. And so the reason this method, the 1 through 6 go down, 7 through 14 or 12 back the other way, that's how they plowed a field. That was the way they would plow a field. And remember, this wasn't anything mechanical. To plow a field was a man, and it was a plow, and it was a mule. That's plowing the field. Can you even imagine? I can't. I would be dead. I'd be laid up for a week if I tried to plow a field. By the way, they would go down, they'd come over a little bit, they'd come all the way back. And that's how they would efficiently plow a field. What we see, or the way we refer to land, how do we refer to land? What's the measurement? The type of measurement that we use to refer to land. Yeah, an acre. Anybody happen to know how many square feet are in 1 acre? There's no reason for you to know that, but you'll have to know it for this class. So tell me, square feet in 1 acre. I've got a way for you to remember it. square feet in an acre are 43,560. That's how many square feet in 1 acre. The way I remember it, 4 little old ladies driving in a car going 35 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. No offense to the old ladies in our lives, but they might drive slow. 43,560 square feet. That's how many square feet are in an acre. You're going to need to know that. That's just going to be something you have to memorize because we're going to need to know how to convert square feet into acres. And so this is going to be a requirement. How big is an acre? If you were to go outside and just look across the way, across the parking lot, or across the field, would you have an idea of how big an acre is? You would. I promise you would. Has anybody here not watched a football game, an American football game? Anybody ever not attended a football game or seen one on TV? If you look at a football field and take out the end zones, that's approximately 1 acre. So now if you're out in the country, you can just envision 3 or 4 football fields in a row and, oh, that's about 4 acres. That might be a little kind of helpful. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks for backing me up there in the chat. 4 little old ladies going 35 into 60. That's 43,560 feet in an acre. Good job. What else? Oh, by the way, how did they come up with an acre anyway? 43,560. That's a pretty weird number. Where the heck did what air did they pull that from? Well, it turns out, if this is true or not, I'm not sure, but this is what I've heard. An acre, it all relates back to that day and time. 1 guy, 1 plow, 1 mule. An acre is about how much land you could plow with 1 mule and 1 man in 1 day. Probably a long day because they were not, probably a daylight day, right? So a couple little nuances there. Let's look at the vocabulary that you need. Here's our township. The dimensions of a township. If the test question said, how big is a township in the government rectangular survey method, you're going to say 6 miles by 6 miles. So if a township is 6 miles by 6 miles, for instance, this square that's labeled number 1, what is that? That is called a section. A township has 36 sections. 6 on one side, 6 on the other, for a total of 36 smaller squares, each called a section. And a section, as we'll see with the orange one over here on the right, a section is 1 mile by 1 mile. And that's how that's laid out. Here's the other thing about the government rectangular survey method. Here's a township. Those are the sections, all 36 of them. The reason that orange one was labeled back here, see that one in the upper right corner, a little green box with a little tiny orange box, is because that is section number 16. And they decided to always put the government buildings, and back then that meant like the sheriff's office and the school and maybe the courthouse, in section 16 in every town. It kind of makes sense. No matter what town you went to, no matter if you've never been there before, you knew if I can just find section 16, that's where I can find the jail, the sheriff, the school, the government buildings. And that was the system they laid out. So number 16 is always government services. A township is 6 miles by 6 miles. A section is 1 mile by 1 mile. And there are 36 sections that make up one township. So what are some words associated with it? Meridians and ranges, baselines and tiers, a township, and sections. Those are all the words associated. Oh, sorry. 17? Is that the number? Okay, sorry. Thank you for correcting. They have mentioned here down at the bottom that a section is 1 mile by 1 mile. Section is 1 mile by 1 mile, and that is 640 acres. Let's break that down to see why and how a section is 640 acres. Let me take a look. Let me show you that. if we have a section and it's a square, that's a great square. Looks like a square. 1 mile by 1 mile. And when we write mile, we could also write 43,500 and, oops, sorry. Nope, that's an acre. Miles. How many feet are in a mile? Anybody have any idea? Any runners out there that might happen to know how many feet are in a mile? 5,280 feet. That's how many feet are in a mile. And so if we have a square that's 1 mile by 1 mile, it's 5,280 feet by 5,280 feet. How could we figure out the area of that perfectly drawn square now that we know the dimensions? Well, 5,280 times 5,280. Oh, wow. That is a boatload of square feet. It's 27,878,400 square feet. That's how many square feet is in 1 mile by 1 mile square. How do we convert this square footage number that's ridiculous? How do we convert that into acres? Oh, look, a T formula. If we take our little old ladies, write them on the bottom, put them on one of the bottom spaces, that means we can take this number of square feet in that lot and divide it by the number of square feet in 1 acre. And that will give us a very important number called the number of acres. We just learned how to convert square footage into acres. So that's where that 640 acres in one section comes from, because we took the square feet in that section and divided it by the square feet in 1 acre. How do we feel about that? Manageable? You definitely need to know the acreage, the square feet in an acre. I'm not 100% that you're going to need to know that feet in a mile, and that's not a square footage number. That's a linear number. Wouldn't hurt to know it, but I don't think for the test purposes you're going to need to know more than just the 43,560 square feet in 1 acre. Let's expand that to another type of problem. What if we are called by somebody who wants us to sell their lot? And the lot is 75 feet on the front and 150 feet in from front to back depth. The way we look at a lot is typically with the road on the bottom. It's always in reference, so it's not always perfectly north, south, east to west orientation. The lot, we want the road frontage to be on the bottom. And so the first number in the dimensions of that lot is going to be the street side, the road frontage. In this case, it would be 75 across the front by 150, and we go clockwise. By 75 across the back by 150 down the right, and then back to the 75 on the front. So that's how you're going to see lots represented out there in the wild. Now, if we know the dimensions of the lot, it's just a basic rectangle. How do we get the area of that rectangle? Area equals length times width, or in this case, length times depth. You might also call it width times depth, but this side times that side. 75 times 150. If we take the number 75 and multiply it by the number 150, that's going to tell us the square feet in that lot. And that's 11,250 square feet. What's a square foot? It looks like this. If we were to do grid patterns, and each of those squares is a foot, it's how many of those are there? There's 11,250 of those, of 1 by 1 foot squares. That's what area is. So area is square feet. The thing across the front, this 75 number, is that square feet? No, that's linear feet. It's in a straight line. The 150 is linear, meaning in a line. But when you multiply them together, we get the square footage. Something else to know about a lot, the number across at the street, in this case 75 feet, that is 75 front feet. If you ever see on a test question a reference to front footage or front feet, it's the first dimension given. It's the one at the street. Because tell me, what type of real estate might care more about the front footage than the square footage? Let me give you choices. Residential or commercial? There you go, Victor. Commercial is all about exposure. How long do they see you while they're driving down the road at 45 miles an hour? Right? So that front footage is probably the way they're going to price the lot. Instead of square feet or instead of acres, they're going to say, well, it's got 200 front feet, so it's $4,500 per front foot. That's not the same thing as figuring out acres. It might be that it's zoned residential, but you could change the zoning to commercial if you petition for that to happen and they agree. And their question is going to be, well, I want to sell it. Which way do I need to sell it to get more money? If I sell it residentially, I need to sell it for the acreage. If I sell it commercially, it's going to be priced per front feet. So which one's going to give me more money? It's worth $8,000 per front foot, but it's worth $20,000 per acre. So which is it? Which one's going to get me more? So that's a very real world consideration. Yeah, that's a good question. Victor says, wouldn't it be highest and best use? Well, that kind of goes hand in hand. What is the highest and best use? The one that gets you more money. Really, that's what it amounts to. What makes it worth the most? The highest and best use. So that might be a very valid question that involves that same calculation. Okay, let's go back to acreage though for a minute. We know that this lot has 11,250 square feet. Let's look at our new T formula we made. We know that 43,560 is down here on the bottom. We know that the number of acres is also on the bottom. And we know that the number of square feet is on the top. So what do we have to work with? Well, we have our what's called a constant. We know that this is the square feet per acre. Guess what? The word per looks suspiciously familiar. Is 43,560 basically another sort of a rate? That's a rate. Dollars per hundred, that's a rate. Dollars per thousand, a mill rate is a rate. Well, 43,560 is square feet per acre. Therefore, that's just another rate. And rates go on the bottom. So what we've figured out is the square footage of this lot is 11,250. So let's plug that into the top. And then let's do the math that's required. The thing on top divided by the thing on the bottom. And so what we've just discovered here by math is that this lot is a little over a quarter acre, 0.26 of an acre, 0.26 acres. And that is converting from square feet to acreage. Kinda, yeah, pretty much one step. Now notice too, what if instead of square footage, they actually say, well, the lot is half an acre. It's a half acre lot. Let me do it over here. What we have is a half acre lot. How many square feet is in a half acre lot? Now this is a little easier because if you'll notice, it's just a half acre and we know how many square feet are in a full acre. So all we really need to do is divide 43,560 by 2. But let's pretend it's not as easy as that. Half acre lot. Let's take our T formula. Let's put the acres in. Half, what's a half? If you forget the decimal version of a half, then just do the math. 1 divided by 2. And there it is, 0.5 acres. 0.5 is on the bottom. 43,560 is also on the bottom. And so our square feet is 21,780. So it goes in two directions. You can go that way or the other way. Whichever thing you need, use what you got to get to the thing you need. Here's how this could all be stacked onto one more element of math. Do we care so much about the acres, or do we care about the dollars per acre? That's really why we want to know the acres, so that we can see what it's worth. Yeah, we'll do an example. And so let's do that. Let's involve dollars per acre with an example. So we've got a lot that is 130 feet by 240 feet. Property in this area is valued at $24,000 per acre. How much is this lot worth? We just increased the number of steps, didn't we? It's not a one-step problem anymore, but it's going to start with that first step. First step is convert the dimensions of the lot into acres of the lot. So forget about the dollars for a minute. Let's just figure out what 130 by 240 ends up being in acres. So that first step is just, if we want to see it, by the way, you're going to get scratch paper on the test. So it's fine to get used to drawing out a little shape. So you could just do this to remember, okay, there's the road. Here's the 130 feet across the front. Here's the 240 from front to back. I'm going to multiply them together. Oops. 130 by 240. Oh, shoot. Fingers. There. So we have a square footage number of 31,200. That's how many square feet are in this lot. But we go by acres. The dollars per acre is not per square foot, but per acre. So we need to convert that. And so we're going to just divide it by the number of square feet in 1 acre. So 31,200 divided by 43,560 shows us that we have 0.7, we'll call it 0.72. 0.72 acres. That's how big this lot is. So you've just converted square feet into acres. Now, the value of acreage in this area is $24,000 per acre. How do we figure out how much this lot is worth at a rate of $24,000 per acre? Well, I just gave you a hint, because there's that word per again. That sounds like a rate to me. $24,000 per acre. That's going to go on the bottom. 24,000. The number of acres is going to stay where it is on the bottom. We're going to multiply the 0.72 acres times the $24,000 per acre. And so this lot should cost less than $24,000 because the lot is less than 1 acre, right? And look at that. It does. It's smaller than an acre, so it's worth less than the full price of an acre. So it's worth $17,280. We'll do another one. Any weak points, any sort of shakiness in there somewhere? Seeing some themes emerge here, aren't we? The rate. Yeah. Yeah. It's like going to the gym. It's just doing those pull-ups, doing those sit-ups. Just the more you do, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, this comes next. Oh, right. Okay. And the familiarity and do a lot of them. It's like once upon a time, way back when, you may not believe it, but I actually ran a half marathon. And in my training, this was double-digit years ago, I made sure to run over the distance of a half marathon so that when I actually ran the actual race, I'm like, I've done this before. No big deal. The nerves of the race didn't affect me as much because I'm like, a half is 13 miles. I ran 16 in my training. No big deal. So there you go. Do a lot of them. So on the test, you're like, okay, I've done 45 of these. This is just another one. No big deal. Let's do another. This time, the lot is 300 feet by 750 feet. Property sells for $38,000 per acre. How much is it worth? All right. What do we think? First step, convert this dimension given into acres. So got to convert them into square feet first. 300 times 750. That is 225,000 square feet. We convert square feet into number of acres by dividing it by the 43,560. And that gives us 5.17 acres. I just rounded up. Since the number after the 6 is a 5, I just went up to 5.17 acres. Now we have acres. How much is this lot worth? We can just bring our T formula down, keep the acres in the same spot, replace the rate that we needed there for the new rate, which is the dollar version, 38,000 per acre, and just do that multiplication. I could leave the number I have in the calculator, but it's going to be a different number than if I use the rounded version. Again, the test question options won't be so close that they'll throw you off. And so this lot is worth $196,460. How we doing? Good. Do 5.3 million of them, and you'll be very confident. There's probably some in the back of the chapter, so that might be helpful. So you can find some there. All right, there's our government rectangular survey method. Let's talk about those other versions of a legal description in North Carolina. We talked about meets and bounds. let's talk about reference to a prior plat map and also reference to a prior recorded deed. Here's what a prior recorded deed looks like. This is what any deed looks like. It's got about a third of the way down the type of deed it is. We'll learn what it means by general warranty deed in a little while. But North Carolina general warranty deed, the names of the parties, some references to the legal description in the box right here. And so this is what you're going to see when you go to the Register of Deeds. You're going to see a bunch of these filled out. And so all we're doing here is referencing one for this same property from before, when it sold last time, probably, or a couple times ago. If the legal description hasn't changed, it's okay to refer back to this deed. Where is it? It's in book 43 on page 197, or whatever the book and page is that this thing is located in when it got recorded. The recorded map or plat map looks like this. These maps are recorded as well. And so you've got a whole neighborhood that we're seeing, and it's divided up into blocks. In this case, this is block E, this lower left section. Block D is in the middle. Block A is on the right side. So that's how they've divided the neighborhood. And so if the property we're buying or selling is in lot 15 of block E, we look down in the block E area and find lot number 17 or whatever it was I just said, lot 15. So in the green there is lot 15 in block E on the map located at book and page number, so on and so forth. It's a map showing the location and boundaries of the lots in the subdivision. It looks a lot like a survey, but it's of the whole neighborhood. And this plat needs to be recorded in order for it to be considered an accurate and a valid legal description. It's got to be recorded, meaning on the public record at the Register of Deeds office. So those are the two things. What we do not use as a legal description, but we still use, we're just going to put it in there, is the street address as well as the tax parcel ID number. Tax parcel ID number. Let me share something with you. When you're looking at the property in the MLS, you can also pull up the tax record. I think it's useful to kind of see how these things actually work in action. So here's the multiple listing service. We're going to log in. We're going to look up a property. I'm just going to pick a neighborhood that I always go to because it always comes to mind. In Charlotte, let me pick the big ones are funner. So let's look at this one. Here's a house in Highland Creek in North Charlotte. They're asking $654,900. Here's what a MLS listing looks like. This is what Zillow gets it from. Zillow, Realtor.com, this is what they're pulling from, the official multiple listing service. And so we've got all kinds of things on this sheet. We've got the address at the top. That's the primary way that we refer to it, even though it's not officially a legal description. But look right here. Oh, look, a legal description. That's a long, weird-looking legal description, and they usually are. But within it, sometimes you'll see, like in this case, a lot number 968. Interesting. But this entire piece needs to be put into the contract, uninterrupted, not carved up. It's got to be this entire reference. That is the legal description for this particular property. Sometimes we have weird letters and numbers in the legal description that we don't even really know what they mean, but you have to include this whole thing. And in this case, the 0.25 acres, that's actually part of the legal description for this particular property. So you would cut and paste or write out this entire thing and put it on the contract. We have other helpful information. Oh, look, lot dimensions. So if we wanted to, it wouldn't be as easy because these are not, it's not an equal size lot. It's 85 by 130 by 84 by 128. But if it were only 85 by 130, we could do the math and verify the actual number of acres now, couldn't we? Because the number of acres is 0.25, and we know that basically 85 by 130 is roughly 0.25 because these other numbers aren't too far off from that, are they? What else do we see here that we're familiar with? Oh, the tax value. wait a minute. We could calculate their annual taxes if we know the tax rate for this city, Charlotte, or this case, it's actually Concord, because this is located in the county of Cabarrus. But let's look at the price again. They're asking $654.9. The tax value is about half that. That's pretty important to calculate the taxes based on tax value instead of market value, isn't it? I'm pretty sure they're going to get pretty close to this, maybe more than, but definitely close. So we don't want to pay taxes on that number. We want to pay taxes on the tax value. Here's another thing. The deed reference. Where's the deed located at the Register of Deeds? It's in Book 7989, page 39. That's the deed reference. So we're seeing all kinds of familiar stuff that we just learned about. Zoning, how is this property zoned? The zoning codes in different municipalities is going to vary. Some cities use different letters than others, but it's some sort of residential type of zoning. And what else? Parcel ID number. That's a hot link. That is the reference on the tax record. So when you're looking up the property's tax record, you're going to use the parcel ID. You could also add the word tax. It's the tax parcel ID number. So tax parcel ID, all of this stuff, most of this information is obtained from the tax record when you're putting the listing into the MLS. As we go on down, I'll show you the rest of how this sheet is laid out. It, of course, has pictures, but it talks about the type of property, single family, traditional. It was built in 2007, so I'm sure it is traditional instead of the more modern transitional layout. It's a 2-story with a basement. And very specifically, it has square footage listed. There's some heated living area, meaning a heat source, a permanent heat source. There's also some non-heated living area because there's a basement. So apparently that basement is not heated. They have not finished it. All kinds of helpful information. They have to specify, we have to specify how much of the square feet is above grade compared to below grade. So there's above grade square footage of the 1800 plus the 1750. Talks about the kind of financing that they would entertain from a buyer. It also notes that they were asking $670 just about for a while, and then they dropped it. So when they make a price reduction, that's reflected here. And then if we go on down, it talks about the rooms and the various features. But then this is the other very useful item on the MLS is the paragraph. In this case, they've used most of it, and they've talked about, they've done a pretty good job describing it, giving it some sales language. It's talking about new heating and air systems, recently replaced roof. That's good stuff to have on there. And then at the very bottom, we'll learn more about this when we get to agency. But it talks about how much you're going to make if you sell this property and you bring the buyer. The buyer agent is going to make 2.5% of the sale price, whatever that ends up being. Not necessarily the $650 whatever asking price, but whatever the sales price ends up being. So if we go back up here to the tax field, here's what the tax information looks like. Here's where we get this info. A lot of the same info, but it's on the tax record. Here's the tax record. It has the owner's names. It shows where they live. In this case, they live in the house itself. Sometimes you'll see the address in the tax record different from the subject property. That means it's probably an investment property. They live somewhere else full time. This is just another one they own. They have the different taxes over the years. So from 2020 to 2021, it stayed consistent even into 2022. But sometimes you'll see this change. The tax value was one number back here, but a different number because they reassessed. In this case, it's the same one. It also shows how much the taxes are per year. $4,483 a year. And then it'll break out the size of the property in square feet and bedrooms, all that fun stuff. So a couple points here. Where's the legal description? Right down here. Same legal description that we saw on the MLS data sheet. And then the parcel ID, the tax parcel ID number is this number. So both this tax parcel ID number and the street address are informal references to the property. Even though they look pretty official, they're not considered legal description. This is the legal description for this property. Good? There's a whole lot more to unpack here, but we'll get to it over the time that we're together. Let's get through the rest of some more of this stuff. So street address and tax parcel ID are not legal descriptions we can use on the deed. We would use something else on the deed, but we would still include them in the contract and in the listing agreement. You use everything at your disposal to refer to the property. Here's a bit of a survey, and if you'll notice, this survey has more than just the lot size. Here's the property, and here's the bold kind of dotted line showing the outer perimeter. It shows lot dimensions. It might identify flood zones. Oh, it's in a flood zone, and the surveyor will do the research and let you know and write it on the survey. It'll also show setback lines. It's not the case that you can, just because you own this bold dotted line, you can't cram the house all the way up to the very edge. There's probably a certain minimum setback line that you have to build the house within. They want the house centered so it looks pretty, not crammed in the back corner so that you have the biggest possible yard. They being the municipality, the city, or town. They're going to have different setbacks. Clearly, there's a garage right here, and that has an allowable setback line that's a little closer than the house's is allowable. So it looks like, I can't read the number, but that's a setback distance. The house can't be any closer than whatever that number is to that line. And then on this side, another one. It'll also have the lot and block number. Where does this live? Where is this property? It's located, in this case, in a certain tax map, block 39, lot 5. And then it will also show if the neighbor's property or your property crosses the property line. That's an encumbrance, that's an encroachment, and that's a problem. Easements and encroachments. Quite often, easements will be identified with light-colored dotted lines, like a utility easement. This one might be something like that. And so if the garage over here actually went over this bold line, that would be encroaching upon the neighbor's property, and that'd be a problem. Who should interpret a survey? What does it mean to interpret a survey? It just means help the client understand it. And that is not us. It's not for us to do. We as the broker should not help them understand it. We should say, oh, you have a question about your survey? Let's talk to either the attorney or the surveyor. I'm not a surveyor. You don't want to. That'd be giving legal advice, basically. Sometimes an agent will try to measure out where the fence could be laid out, and they'll get their business card, make a little tiny mark, and say, oh, let's see, that's 10 feet. Well, that's more than we're supposed to do. We don't go that far. This is a survey, and it's in a cul-de-sac, and it's showing looks like an overhead electric line across the back. So there's a utility easement, most likely. It shows the setback, the setback line over here on the right or the left. This corner of the porch is 5.1 feet from the property line. And back here, it's 15.4 feet from the property line. And over here, it's 12.4 to the carport. And let's see. Looks like the setback lines are pretty tight against the property line in this case. These weird numbers with R's, that means radius. So it's because the front line in this house is actually a curve. So they explain how a radius works, but we don't have to go that far as a broker. And then it's certified, has the name of the surveyor, and it's a stamp and the signature and the date it was done. So this is a legal document. We should not give legal advice about a legal document. We don't interpret surveys. We order it. We tell them you should get a survey. And if they say, I don't want to pay for a survey, we say, you need a survey. And if they say, I don't want one, you say, please sign here so I have proof that I told you you should have a survey. So next year, when this comes back to bite you, you don't come at me to pay money. By the way, did I tell you the horror story? I think I might have told you last night. The well that was not on the property, it was actually on the neighbor's property, $60,000 to drill the new well that the agent got to pay for. So let's make sure we always tell them to get a survey. The deed looks like this, a little zoomed in version. We've got, it's evidence of title to the real estate. It's the title. The deed is the title. It represents that bundle of legal rights we talked about. To transfer title, there's several things have to happen. Under common law, meaning like the basic common law of North Carolina common law, title transfers at what point in time? It's when the deed has been delivered to the new buyer and they have accepted it. That event in which you've delivered it to them and they've accepted it. Where is this happening, by the way, in real life, IRL? When is this deed transfer happening? When and where? Yes, good point. Victor asked, does that survey show wells and septic? Yeah, it typically would make a reference, but there's a septic permit that'll show exactly more closely where the septic tank and the leach fields are located. There you go, at the closing, yeah. That's when this deed delivery and acceptance is happening, where and when. It's at that closing table, the settlement agent, the closing attorney. You got it. So in North Carolina, acceptance is noted at the point when the deed gets recorded at the courthouse. That's when it's not just delivery and acceptance. The word acceptance is more specifically in North Carolina when the deed gets recorded at the courthouse. So here's how the chain of events goes down. Let me step into my office over here. There we go. So we've got a closing. Everybody meets. Let's just say Friday at 10 a.m. Typically, the seller and the listing agent for the seller will go in, sit across from the attorney by themselves, no buyer. They will sign the papers. There's only about 5 of them. One of them is the deed. By the way, testable question, who signs the deed? The grantor or the seller is the only person who signs the deed. The buyer does not sign the deed. So they're going to sign the deed. They're going to sign the closing disclosure that we'll learn about in chapter 21. Chapter 21 is about closing the transaction, and we'll learn about the paper, the main document that has every dollar and cent accounted for in the transaction on both buyer and seller side, what they're paying, what they're getting. So they're going to go through that statement and make sure everything looks right. They sign off on that. And a couple other things like a tax document so the IRS can be informed that they sold property so that they can do what they do. And maybe a couple other things too. And they're done. 15 minutes, unless they have a bunch of questions, they're in and out and gone. Now they bring the buyer in. Buyer and buyer's agent sits across from the attorney all by themselves. No seller in sight usually. And they sign a lot more papers because they're probably getting a loan. And that loan comes with a lot of documents. The loan package is probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick, full of documents. That's what the attorney and paralegals have been working on all this time, these last 30 days or 45. So the attorney, after having gone through all that paperwork and getting signatures from everybody, the next step after the buyer has signed all the lender documents, the attorney hands them to the paralegal. She takes them and scans them and sends them to the lender, and somebody at the loan office or the lender's office or the bank makes sure they hit all the right lines with initials and signatures. Is everything signed and initialed? Is everything looking good? Once it's verified that it's looking good, several minutes, maybe an hour later, the attorney says, okay, everything's good. We're going to go record it at the courthouse now. Back in the day, that would mean they would walk down the street to the courthouse because all the closing attorneys were located near the courthouse. That's where they wanted to have their offices. Now that means they get in line virtually, but they still get in line. They don't, it's not like going on Amazon and buying gummy bears. You can do that at 3 a.m. and they'll probably be at your doorstep by 6 a.m. That's not the same thing. You're literally in a queue just as if you were physically there having to wait in line because there's a real human on the other end of that computer looking at everything that the deed that you're asking them to put on the public record. So it's not quick and easy. It might take a couple hours. You better tell your client, hey, client, when we sign at 10 a.m., you're not going to get the keys for probably 2 or 3 hours that day because some more steps have to happen, including making sure the lender's cool with everything, making sure the lender funds the loan, meaning sends the money, wires it to the attorney's office. That's important. And then making sure once everything is all cleared, the attorney goes to the Register of Deeds online or in person. Some still do it in person. And they do one more check to make sure nobody like a roofer or a plumber or any other lien may have been placed on the property at the last minute. They do one more title check, and then they record the deed. That's the chain of events. So, when does the property officially considered to have been closed? When the final recording happens. When is that? It's not immediately as soon as you've signed papers in the office. It's later that day. So if you've ever heard of a nightmare situation of somebody who went to have a closing on a Friday, you ever heard of this? Turns out they had to wait until Monday for some reason. What happened is they had a settlement meeting on a Friday, but they didn't get finished with all the paperwork in time, probably before 4 p.m., because that's when the Register of Deeds office closes, both in person and online. And if they didn't get all that stuff done by 4, guess what? They're homeless until Monday. It's not going to close until Monday. They had a settlement, but they didn't have a closing. They wanted to do both today, but because things got delayed, because they didn't get it recorded today, they don't have a place to stay unless the seller decides to let them move in early, even though they're not officially the buyer yet. Guess what? They're not officially the buyer yet. What if the house burns down because they started a fire in a 50-gallon barrel to celebrate a bonfire or something, and the house burns down? Whose insurance covers it? So the seller better keep their insurance policy in place through the weekend. They thought they were done and didn't have a house anymore, just had money in hand on Friday, but nope, it's all delayed. And whose insurance covers the buyer's belongings if the seller's nice enough to let him move in early? They don't have to. The seller doesn't have to let him move in. The seller can say, hey, I'm not getting my money till Monday. You're not getting the keys till Monday. You're going to have to figure something else out. I don't care where you sleep, but it's not in my house because it's still my house. They may say it nicer, but they don't need to do that. Sometimes the buyer gets creative and says, oh my gosh, our stuff's on a moving truck. If this gets delayed, we're going to have to pay to move twice because they're going to have to pull it off the truck, stick it in mini storage, and stick it back on the truck, and then bring it over on Monday. And can't we just move it into the garage? Maybe. But as brokers, it all comes back to what we give advice. What advice do we give? Need to just tell the clients what the ups and downs are, positives and negatives, pros and cons. And those are, if you want to let them move in early, even if it's just their stuff in the garage, you need to talk to the insurance company. You need to make sure adequate coverage is in place. And you need to have some paperwork signed, because essentially letting the buyer move in a couple of days early, but since the closing's delayed till Monday, you're letting them be a renter. That buyer's basically a renter for 2 days. Did you intend to be a landlord, Mr. Seller? No? Well, you are now if you let that buyer move in early. And there's a document for that. There's a buyer moving in before closing, because closing didn't just happen. All we had just now was settlement. Papers signed is settlement. Closing is recording. Closing's not happening till Monday. So the buyer possession before closing agreement is basically a little 2-page miniature lease that talks about things like who pays the HOA fees for 2 days worth, who pays for insurance coverage and what kind, and what about pets, and what if you don't actually close on Monday, it turns into another week because sometimes stuff happens. Can I kick you back out? Can I evict you if it all just blows apart, goes sideways? And it never happens. Now I've got a tenant. How hard is it to evict somebody that doesn't want to go away? It ain't quick. It might take a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 months, especially a buyer that feels like they already own it. You see all the ramifications? You see how complicated that is? That's what we do. Oh, guess what? HGTV told you that we just pop champagne bottles when we get one under contract, but this is what's going on behind the scenes. This is what keeps us up at night keeps us from sleeping. Can you imagine waking up on Friday morning happy that you're going to have a closing that day and going to bed on Friday night because everybody's mad because you didn't have a closing that day? And now you've got 2 days of your weekend that's probably going to be spent holding the hand of your client to help them stay motivated and peace. And you might even put them in your house to sleep. Okay, maybe not. But you've got a lot of stress that you need to be the professional and buffer out of the situation. This is not a job for infants, right? We are cheerleaders, we are counselors, we are psychiatrists, we are babysitters, we are coordinators, we are cheerleaders, we are cheerleaders, we are cheerleaders. So it's a big deal. And then, yeah, great point. At the very end of all of that, who gets paid last? Who has 2 thumbs and gets paid last? This guy. It's not until the keys are given, the seller gets their money, all the bills are paid, the inspections are paid, the closing is done, the deed is recorded, and oh yeah, attorney says, oh, hey agent, here's your check. And here's the bad news. That check doesn't even have your name on it. It has your firm's name. You still got to take it back to the office and turn it in and maybe even wait another day or 2 for them to give you your part. Welcome to real estate. So, it is what it is, but that's the process. I think that's important to understand. When is the acceptance? It's when the deed is recorded. It might not be the same day that the papers got signed. Let's go ahead and have our last break. I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Let's pick it up. Last hour, not even that much. Last 45 minutes or so. Talk about some deed transfer of title. Got some words for you. Alienation. That's the word for selling your property, right? Transferring property. You could be gifting it too. Getting rid of it, right? Getting it out of your own hands is alienation. Could be voluntarily. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, I did mute. Thank you. I never mute, but I muted this time. I was watching some stuff. Thank you. Alienation is transferring property, selling it or gifting it, right? You're just getting rid of it in some way. If you're choosing to do it and you're happy about it, that's giving it away, selling it. That's a voluntary alienation. But if you're being forced to get rid of it through court action, that would be involuntary, sort of like a voluntary lien or an involuntary lien from last night. So just some words, just some vocabulary words. When it comes to a trust, we talked about a trust a little bit, or probate. Yeah, probate. When it comes to probate, you've died and somebody's getting your property. The executor of your estate carries out your wishes. And you may not have a will, for instance, so that executor still carries out and handles and settles your estate. They go to the courthouse, they say, hey, this person passed away, here's the death certificate. Need to open up probate for this person, and it might involve real estate, might involve cars, insurance policies. They do all the things to settle your estate. So that probate process is that legal process of handling somebody's affairs, their estate, all their financials, their bank accounts need to be closed out, all these different places, however many accounts they have, insurance policies, bank accounts, multiple ones, car loans. Everybody wants to see proof that you died. You got to have multiple copies of the death certificate. So that's really one of the first steps. How many the person at the funeral home handling your service will ask your executor, how many copies of the death certificate do you need? It's going to depend on how many things they need to close out that you had going on. The one receiving your property in probate is the beneficiary. Might be multiple ones, right? This person's getting your watches, this person's getting your car, these getting your property. Whoever's receiving stuff is the beneficiary. So what happens to real estate when an owner dies? It depends. My favorite answer in real estate, it depends on if that person made plans or not. Plans like a will. Did the person have a will when they died? By the way, have a will in case you die. Because it makes things a little easier for your survivors. Got to help them out, and that will is going to let everybody know what your wishes were. If you die with a will, here's a vocabulary term you need for this course. The word is testate. You died testate. T-E-S-T-A-T-E means the person died with a will. Now everybody knows who they want to get their stuff, including their real estate. And so when you leave your real estate to your heirs through your will, that's voluntary alienation because you chose whom to give it to through your will. Voluntary alienation. The best way to ensure the deceased person's wishes are fulfilled is for them to tell you the instructions. Here's what I want to happen with my stuff. If someone dies without a will, the word for that is they died intestate. Same word, but the word in front of it. Intestate means died without a will. So the test question might say, John Smith died intestate. What happens to his property? Okay. That's a pretty small question. You got to know some vocabulary to understand what's happening. And you know the words, so you know that what's happened is he died without a will. What happens to somebody's real estate if they die without a will? It depends. There's that guy again. He's showing up all over the place in this course, isn't he? So what happens when you die without a will? It depends if you have heirs or not. Do you have heirs? The authorities, the executor, people are going to search for that. They're going to see if they can find kids. Do you have kids? Do you have parents still alive? Do you have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, any sort of heirs? If you have nobody, it's pretty sad to think about. Somebody dies with no will and no heirs. What happens to their real estate? Well, the generous, kind state of North Carolina says, we'll take care of that for you. We'll take it. Guess what? If you don't have a will in place, if you don't have any heirs, and you don't want North Carolina to get your property, you better fix those things. Hurry up and get some heirs. I'm just kidding. Hurry up and write a will. Leave it to somebody. Don't let the state take it, because North Carolina will take it over through a process that is another word you need to know for this class called escheat. Escheat. E-S-C-H-E-A-T. The process of escheat. What does that mean? It means you died with no will and no heirs, and the state took your property because they had no one else to take it. So they took it. What are they going to do with it? Maybe turn it into a park, maybe sell it, take the proceeds and abuse the funds. I don't know what states do with money. So that's the process. Those are some important words to know. Dying without a will is involuntary alienation because it's a negative. You didn't tell them what you wanted to be done with your property, so they had to figure it out. And ultimately, it could end up in somebody that in the state itself getting it through a sheet. If the heir is very young. they would typically that kid would have somebody labeled as their guardian, and so it might be that property is held in trust. It could be that somehow somebody takes care of that property. It might be that the kid needs to be taken care of, and so the property needs to be sold to get the money to help go for the kid's education, college, just expenses. So lots of different things. Really, that's an attorney question. If you get that in real life, or if you have that personally question for yourself or a friend, I would talk to an attorney and see what specifics for that situation are applicable. Voluntary alienation means the owner chose to transfer it either through selling it or gifting it to someone. We saw that already. Involuntary is against the owner's wishes. It's negative. It's court ordered. Oh, shoot, I'm losing my property because I didn't pay a bill. I got liens. I got foreclosed. I'm losing it. I'm alienating myself from it involuntarily because I'm not happy about it. It's a negative. A foreclosure, the big bad word of real estate. I'm going to talk a lot about foreclosure, particularly in chapters 14 and 15. But if you don't pay that mortgage as you agreed to do, that lender can eventually decide to foreclose on you. When do they foreclose? It depends. Depends on when they want to foreclose. They might not foreclose for several months. Back in 2008, 9, 10, there were banks who couldn't get around to everybody who weren't paying their mortgages, and people were actually still living in their houses a year or more and had not paid a house payment in all that time. Sounds good financially, sounds bad for stress. Every day you don't know if you're going to get kicked out of your house or you get that notice in the mail. But it's coming and it's adding up, right? So it might be 1 month behind, 2, 3, 5 months behind. Just depends. When does the bank choose to initiate the foreclosure proceedings? It's their choice. Because ultimately, if you don't pay, you don't stay. You signed that mortgage. In North Carolina, it's not called a mortgage, by the way. It's called a deed of trust. Deed of trust. That's what a mortgage is in North Carolina. But it's essentially pledging the property as collateral for the loan. Hey, please give me $500,000 and you can have my house if I don't pay the payment like I'm promising I will. That's what that is. Deed of trust says if you don't pay, you don't stay. The lender can kick you out. You gave them permission to do that. In other words, it goes back to that alienation word again. It's called the alienation clause. Well, no, it's actually called the acceleration clause. The acceleration clause says if you don't pay your mortgage payment, they can accelerate the entire loan to be due immediately. Who can pay the loan at the drop of a hat? Not very many people. Can't win the lottery real quick. And since you can't hurry up and pay it all off immediately because they're accelerating it because you missed payments, they start the foreclosure process, which ultimately can result in selling the house to someone else to get money so that all your debts, your liens can be paid. And maybe if there's any money left after paying all your penalties and interest from being behind and all the other liens that might be on the property, like tax liens, you might end up with some money, but that's kind of a joke because the buyer borrower who gets foreclosed upon almost never ends up with any money. But it could happen legally. But usually there's too many other bills that need to be paid. So foreclosures when that mortgagee, the lender, takes the property to pay off all the debts that you owe. We saw this already. This is another way we could alienate ourselves from our property. We could lose it because somebody else was using it openly, continuously, exclusively, adversely, and notoriously for a certain amount of time. If there's no cloud on the title, that needs to be 20 consecutive years. If there is a cloud on the title, they need to do all this stuff for only 7 years. And they could go to court and say, hey, I've been doing all this stuff for these number of years. Hey, judge, let me have the property. So you could lose it because they did all of this stuff. Through adverse possession, you lost your property to someone else. The petitioning party is the one who used it in these ways and is now trying to get the property given to them by the court system. So you could lose your ownership that way. Here's that number of years again. If it's nice, clear title like this clear glass of water, then they need to use it in that ocean acronym amount of ways for 20 years straight. If it's a cloudy title, then they only need to use it for 7 years consecutively. And it can't be a government-owned property. Not allowed. Can't try adverse possession to get government-owned property. It's exempt from that particular nuance. Here's the word escheat we just saw a little bit ago. The government's right when property is basically abandoned. If you die without a will and without heirs, you're abandoning your property. And so the state takes the property through escheat. It's called the government's reversionary right because the property got abandoned. I think we mentioned eminent domain last night. The concept of, in this case, looks like, let's say those houses there on the left had nice big front yards once upon a time. But this road is now a 4-lane road. It used to only be a 2-lane road, but they expanded it, widened it to serve the whole neighborhood, the whole community, the public good. And to widen the road, they had to get close to these houses and take some of their property. They didn't just take it, though. The government sent out a letter and said, hey, we're going to buy part of your front yard so that we can widen the road. And you might say, I don't want you to. And the government says, tough, it's for the public good. You have to. You could have due process. That's what that means. Owners must have access to due process. They could go to court and say, well, I dispute it. Good luck. You're probably going to lose. If the government can prove that it was for the good of the public, not just one person, and they are fairly compensating them, then you're probably going to lose in court and they're going to take half your yard if that's what they want. But you do have to have access to a court proceeding if you want it. Or you might be happy with the compensation they give you. So if they do end up taking it, even though you don't want them to, that's called condemnation. Or you could give it up willingly in exchange for that fair compensation number, whatever the market value is determined by an appraiser. And that whole process is called eminent domain. So, testable, highly testable, this slide. Let's pay close attention. Go ahead. What's that question? Yeah. Good question. So a title or a deed could be clouded if let's just say maybe you have a long lost cousin that comes forward and says, wait a minute, grandma gave me 5% of that property you're trying to sell, and I don't want to sell it. I want my part. I'm not signing any papers. They have clouded up the process. They've made that transaction not so easy, right? So that could cloud the title. A third party who claims ownership could cloud the title. It could also be that you're getting sued in court over something, and part of that lawsuit is going to involve your property. And so while you're in that lawsuit, the title is clouded because it might or it might not end up as a lien against your property. So litigation or a lis pendens, right? Litigation could cloud the title to the property. Ideally, you want to eliminate all those clouds and clear up that title so that you're conveying to the new buyer a nice, clean, clear title with no issues. But they could still buy it with the issues as long as they're willing to accept it in that condition. They're probably going to want a discount, though. If they're buying a property with a clouded title instead of a clear title, they're probably not going to be willing to pay full market value for it. It could also result from liens. There's lots of things that could end up with a clouded title. Another one, as we recall, could be that the neighbor's property encroaches over your line, or your property encroaches over their line. That will cloud your title too. Does that help? You're welcome. So essential elements of a valid deed. Okay, let's frame this so that it doesn't get confusing. If I can find my cursor. There we go. Essential elements of a valid deed. These are the items, the informational pieces that need to be on every deed in order for that deed to be considered valid. If it's not valid, what else could it be? It could be void. It could also be voidable. So we're going to talk about three very important V words: valid, void, and voidable. Valid means everything's nice. Everything's good, in order. Your clouded probably no clouded title. It's a good deed. It's a solid deed. All of these items, these bullet points, are in effect. So in order for the deed to be a valid deed, it needs to be in writing. And we could add that phrase in front of each of these bullet points. In order for a deed to be a valid deed, the grantor, the seller, must have legal capacity. What's that mean? Legal capacity of the parties. What does it mean to be of legal capacity? Anybody have any ideas? It's three things. And you might have seen it you'll see it in your reading. 18, sane, and sober. Right? Were you of age, of legal age? Are you mentally sane? And were you sober at the time you promised to do the thing or sign over the deed? So the grantor, the seller, must have been 18, sane, and sober back when they signed the deed over in order for it to be considered a valid deed. What if somebody who's underage owns property? Once upon a time, years ago, I'm a YouTube junkie. I'll go a deep dive some random topic and just completely go nuts and watch a million of whatever that is. And years ago, I found this kid, that 16-year-old kid, and he jumped off the roof of his house onto trampolines. He just did a bunch of videos like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is his mother thinking? But he did that. And I remember when I first found him, he had 10,000 subscribers. And a year later, I would check in from time to time. He had 1 million subscribers. He got to the point in the heyday of YouTube a few years ago, back when ad revenue was really big. He ended up buying a $160,000 sports car and a $400,000 house for his mom and his brothers and sisters to live in, and himself. If he came here to my house and said, "You've got 5 acres, I want to buy it," could I sell it to him if he were 17 years old, underage? Sure, I could. He's paying me cash, trampoline money. Okay, great. But is it going to be the same as if one of you comes to me and wants to buy my property? It's a little different because he's underage. There are special considerations that need to be taken into account. So if he were to buy that property and then turn around and sell it, he is an underage seller. He's the grantor. Does he have legal capacity? No. He's not 18. He's hopefully sane and sober, but he's not 18. He does not have legal capacity as a seller. So therefore, is that a valid deed that he would be creating when he signs it? No, he wasn't of legal capacity. What else? The grantor and grantee, the buyer and the seller, have to be identified in the deed. Even though only one of them signs it, the seller, not the buyer, both of their names are in the deed. That makes for a valid deed. In order for it to be a valid deed, the property must be adequately identified. What does that mean? What constitutes adequate identification of the property? What's the word that we just studied tonight? What way to describe the property is adequate identification? Yeah, that's one of them. Some kind of legal description. There's 3 possibilities. Meets and bounds is the best one, most favored one, but it also could be reference to a prior recorded deed or a reference to a prior recorded plat. But that's adequately identified. That's what that means. Address is not good enough, right? In order for a deed to be considered a valid deed, there must be adequate words of conveyance. What the heck does that mean? That just means that in the deed, there's actually words that say what you're doing. This person is selling it to this other person for this much, and this property at this legal description. So you're actually saying what the thing is that you're intending. It's not just a piece of paper with names on it. It's got to have actual words that say what you're trying to accomplish here. I'm giving it. I'm selling it. It might be that your grandma's giving it to you. So it's a valid gift deed. She's saying, I'm not asking Sonny Boy to pay me money. I'm just going to give it to him because he's so darn cute. Adequate words of conveyance, whatever the thing is you're conveying, and the terms around it. In order for a deed to be a valid deed, it must be signed by the grantor. The grantor is the seller or the seller, right? And then finally, you'll see this familiar term. In order for it to be a valid deed, The deed must be delivered and voluntarily accepted. What's that mean in North Carolina to accept the deed? What's the magic word? When it has been what is when it has been accepted. When the deed has been recorded. You got it. Closing has happened because the deed is recorded. That is officially voluntary acceptance, typically in North Carolina. Now, there's a little weird wrinkle that I'll have to explain to you in just a minute. But all of these things need to be in place in order for this deed to be considered a valid deed. We're going to talk about what is it if it's not a valid deed in a little bit. But again, reminder, buyer or grantee does not sign the deed. These are the essential elements. Let's look at the non-essential elements of a deed. This is where the confusion comes in. People are like, all of these things look like a smart idea. Why aren't they all just essential? Well, they're not. Well, here's how you should think of it. These things are probably also on the deed. We'll go down through them in a minute. But the absence of any of these things does not make the deed invalid. If these things are not on the deed, it's still a valid deed, in other words. Does that make sense? So let's think of it like that. What are these non-essential elements? It's still a valid deed, even if it's not dated. It should be dated. It's probably smart to be dated, but that doesn't make it valid or not. The only thing that makes a deed valid are these things we looked at just now, a second ago. So we can add that phrase in front of each of these bullets. It's still a valid deed even if it's not dated. It's still a valid deed even if it hasn't been witnessed when it was signed. Like a third party watching you sign it. So that where there's proof that it was really you who signed it. That is a great idea, but it doesn't affect whether the deed is considered to be valid or not. What is valid, by the way? Valid means the best possible what a deed it could be. There's no disputing it. There's no confusion. It's solid. Sort of reminds me of the same feeling as you get when it's a fee simple absolute. That's the best way to own something. Well, a valid deed is the best way to have a deed, best kind of deed. What about number 3? It's still a valid deed. This is the confusing one. It's still a valid deed even if it's not recorded. But Neil, you just told us that in order to be voluntarily accepted in North Carolina, it's got to be recorded. I know. But the traditional definition of delivery and acceptance is one thing. That's what makes it a valid deed. And it will get recorded because in North Carolina, unless it's recorded, nobody's going to be cool with that. The lender's not happy with it. It's not closed until it's recorded. But recording it doesn't make it considered valid. So don't read too much into it. Don't get too confused. Just remember it sounds weird. And recording, while it seems like it should be something required to make it a valid deed, it's not. It's still a valid deed even if it's not been notarized. Who's familiar with the term notarized or notary public? Anybody actually a notary? If you need to get something notarized, what do you do? Where do you go? Your bank probably has a notary. There's people that will advertise that there'll be a notary, and it's for like $20. They'll watch you sign the document to prove. Yeah, the post office is a good one too. $20 or $50, however, they have a limit. They can't just charge you any old number. They're limited as to what they can charge for that service. The closing attorney is a notary, by the way. They notarize several documents. But it doesn't affect whether the deed is valid just because it wasn't notarized. It's a good idea for it to be notarized. It probably will be notarized, but that doesn't affect the deed's validity. Making sense? What about the next one? An exact amount of consideration. How much did this house cost? It does not make it a valid deed if there's no amount of consideration listed on the deed. How much did the house cost is not probably on the deed, frankly, because that doesn't mean it's a valid deed or not, just because that price is not on there. And then it's still a valid deed even if it's not sealed. This concept of a sealed signature, it comes from like the Middle Ages. You're with me, like Braveheart days when a king had a ring, a signet ring, and they would melt the wax on the scroll and dip the ring on it and make the mark. So then they gave it to the courier, the person on horseback, and they drove it 54 days to the person they're sending it to. And that person sees that the wax ring seal is not disturbed, and they know no one read it since the original sender sent it. We don't do the wax ring anymore with the wax or the ring or any of that. But that morphed into the word seal. Anybody ever seen an official document next to the signature line and it had the word seal next to it? That is kind of the same idea without the need for matches and candles and rings and hot wax. So if it doesn't have the word seal, it's still a valid deed. And then finally, it's still a valid deed even if the grantee doesn't sign it. Guess what? The grantee doesn't sign it, and it's still a valid deed. So all of these things are, while a good idea, probably, except for that last one, we don't worry about that one. But all these other things might actually be on the deed. That might be dated, witnessed, recorded, notarized, consideration mentioned, and sealed, with the word seal. But if any of those are missing, doesn't affect its validity. It's still a valid deed. Does that help make a little more sense in the difference? You're just going to have to, I can't even come up with you might be able to come up with a decent acronym for this, but you're just going to have to really focus on the things that make it an essential element, the essential elements that make it a valid deed, and compare to these to just memorize them. Got some terms. We've got the seller, who might also be called the grantor, because they're giving the deed to the property, saying, I own it, I'm giving it to you, I'm selling it to you. That's the grantor. The giver of anything, as we'll see multiple times in this course, ends in OR, grantor. The buyer's the one receiving the deed, they're getting it. Grantee ends in EE. There's other words like that. As we go through more chapters along the way, you'll see these words, but we just covered grantor and grantee. Seller's given the deed to the buyer. They're receiving it in exchange for money. The offeror, when you're making an offer on the property, the one making the offer might be the buyer, usually starts out being the buyer, and so they're the offeror. And the seller's receiving that offer, they're the offeree. But if the seller doesn't like the offer, they're like, that's not quite as much as I want. I'm going to counter offer for another $20,000. Well, the seller became the offeror now. With that counter offer, now the seller's giving the offer, making it, giving it, and the buyer's receiving it because it's a counter. Does that make sense? When we're talking about a lease, the one who is giving the lease is the landlord. They're saying, hey, tenant, you can stay here in exchange for money. You can have a possessory interest. You don't get to own it, but you get to stay here, sleep here. And so I'm giving you the lease. A leaseor is the landlord. The leasee is the tenant. Mortgage is the confusing one, because if I didn't have this all written out here and I just put the word mortgagor in front of you and said, which is this? Is it the lender or is it the borrower? I know I would have immediately gotten it wrong, and I would have said the mortgagor must be the lender, but you got to think of it the right way. The mortgagor is the borrower, the buyer-borrower, because what are they giving? They're giving a promise, a pledge. They're pledging the property that you're helping them buy if you're the lender. They're pledging it as collateral for the loan. I'm so confident that I will live up to my end of the bargain and pay you that mortgage payment that I've agreed to, that if I don't, I'll sign off and give you no trouble if you need to foreclose. You get the property if you need to foreclose. And I'm agreeing right now, right here at closing, that I'll be okay with you foreclosing on the property because I don't plan on not making the payments. So you're giving that property as collateral, therefore the mortgagor is the borrower. An option to purchase is literally that. You're not buying the property. You're just buying an opportunity to buy it because you're not sure if you want to buy it yet. What you do know is that you want your place in line to be number one. You're willing to pay some money to that seller to say, hey, seller, don't sell this out from under me. I'm still thinking about it. Can I buy an option to buy the property? In other words, maybe you're waiting for a zoning meeting, a zoning hearing to happen, and maybe if the zoning gets changed, this property will be worth a lot to you because you want to use it for a certain purpose. but it's zoned wrong. And you won't know for 3 more months until the zoning hearing happens, and you petition them to rezone it or do your due diligence and figure it out. So you say, hey, seller, I might want to buy your property. Let me give you $10,000 option fee, and you will sit quietly and not sell it to anybody else and give me a whole year to decide if I want to buy it or not. And then maybe 3 months goes by and that meeting happens and you're like, oh, they changed the zoning in this area, so now I can do what I want to. Yes, I do want to buy it. Hey, seller, good news. I'm going to go ahead and buy it now. Or the zoning meeting or whatever it is might be a highway plan, didn't get approved. It doesn't go through. You say, hey, seller, bad news. They're not going to put the road where I thought they were. Therefore, this won't be as busy of an area for my business. Therefore, I don't want to buy your property. You still get to keep the option fee I gave you, $8,000, $5,000, but I'm choosing not to buy it. Thanks for giving me the time to think about it and figure it out. That's what an option is, an option to purchase. You might have heard of an option to purchase related to a lease, maybe a renter. They live there, they rent there, they might want to buy it. That's not quite the same thing. We'll talk about what that is later. But the one giving the option is the seller. The seller's given the buyer, potential buyer, the option to buy the property. And the seller has to sit there and wait for that buyer to make the decision. They sold them an amount of time for them to make that decision, and they can't rush them. And then finally, this weird phrase called a contract for deed. That's essentially a form of seller financing. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just go to a random seller and say, I don't want to go to Bank of America. I just want to pay you every month until I own the whole property. Can I just borrow it from you? You own the property free and clear. Why don't you be the bank? Some sellers are willing to finance the property themselves. Instead of giving them the full lump sum $350,000 purchase price, you sign a note, a special note, and say, instead of giving you the full price, how about I just make you payments that will include some principal and some interest? I'll give you $1,100 a month for the next 20 years or whatever it needs to add up to at this interest rate. Basically, the seller is the bank. And so a contract for deed is a form of seller financing, and it's got these weird words that don't seem to make any sense, but the seller in that case is the vendor and the buyer's the vendee when it's contract for deed. So when you see contract for deed, think the seller is the bank. Speaking of deeds, we talked about what makes a valid deed. Now let's talk about the types of deeds. The best kind of deed you can get is the kind of deed where the seller says, I promise you everything is okay with this property. I warrant it. I guarantee that you will never have any challenges from any third parties, no long lost cousins. Nobody will ever challenge you about the ownership that I'm be passing along to you in this purchase. I guarantee it. There are 5 guarantees or promises or covenants that come along with a general warranty deed. When you sell a property to somebody and give them a deed, sign it over to them, and it's called a general warranty deed, that's the best kind of ownership, most complete kind of ownership you're giving to them. And as a buyer, you should be thrilled because you're like, okay, great. It's so extensive that the seller is saying, look, if you ever have trouble and a challenge arises in your ownership, I'm so confident about this that I will come back into your world and help you clear it up. Wow. Wait a minute. I thought that seller was just going to sell and move off to overseas somewhere and never hear. Well, a general warranty deed is basically the seller standing behind it and saying, I promise you everything's going to be okay. How do they know it's going to be okay? Well, one thing that's in place to help with that is something called title insurance. They had a title insurance policy on the property when they owned it, and that involved making sure that it's a clear chain of who bought it from who, bought it from who, bought it from who over the years. We'll talk about that title insurance and title search process later. So a general warranty deed means the seller or grantor is defending the title to the property against anybody who might lay claim to owning it forever. In the past, back forever, and in the future. That's a general warranty deed. That's the best kind. This is one of those weird ones. If you just had the words in front of you, I know I would say special warranty is probably the best one, because the word special sounds more special than the word general. But just another straight up memorization. You just got to force it into your brain. General warranty deed is the best kind of deed because all claims against the title are defended by that seller forever and ever and ever. There are 5 guarantees that we'll look at about a general warranty deed in a minute. The next best kind of deed is a special warranty deed. And the thing about that is the seller is saying, look, I'm not giving you a general warranty deed because I don't know what may have happened 40 years ago. I will only defend the title to this property for the amount of time that I was actually the owner of this property. I can't say anything about when people before me owned it. That's the difference between general warranty and special warranty. It's not quite as good. By the way, when you buy a foreclosure property from a bank, because sometimes the banks foreclose on the property and they actually end up owning the property. And when they own property, they don't want to own real estate. They want money. They work with money. So it's annoying to them to have to deal with real estate, but the real estate gets sold and becomes money. So when that bank has to take a house from somebody and actually own it because nobody else outbid them, you've got real estate owned by the bank. Oh, wait a minute. Real estate owned by the bank. Oops, wrong noise. Real estate owned by the bank. What does that start with? REO property. Anybody ever heard of REO properties? REO properties. That's real estate owned by the bank. That's bank owned property. If you buy a foreclosure that happened owned by the bank, you buy it from the bank, guess what? They're not going to give you a general warranty deed. They're going to say, we don't know what happened before we or the owner. We're only going to protect this property, defend this deed while we owned it for the last year and a half. Because, by the way, it might take them a year, year and a half before they finally sell it. They took it, it got settled and in their possession, and they're slow. Banks are not good in real estate business. They're slow. They have to pick an agent to list it with. It might need a bunch of work. Yeah, title insurance does help to cover that. That's part of that process too. We'll talk about how that fits in too. Finally, a quit claim deed. Another word you might see that's somewhat like that is a bargain and sale deed. You're just passing the ownership to a person and you're not offering them any sort of warranty protections at all. You're saying, hey, it is what it is. I'll sign it over to you because I'm the seller, I'm the owner, but I'm not making any extra claims. I'm not promising to defend the title at all. A quit claim deed. By the way, anybody ever heard of wholesaling property? Or a loan assumption, anything like that? Sometimes you might have an investor that says, hey, desperate seller, I know you're desperate because you came to me, you called me on that yellow sign that I put in the intersection, the bandit sign. Call, if you need cash for your house, call this number. You ever seen those signs? They're looking for desperate sellers. And that seller calls and says, can you get me money for my house within the week? I've got problems. And that investor, they might be an investor. They might just be something worse. But they say, yeah, okay, I'll buy it for this price. And this price is like $200,000 when the property's really worth $500,000. But they're going to give it to the seller and they'll be able to hopefully fix their problems. It might be that they just want to assume the seller's mortgage. And they say, hey, let me just take over the payments of your property and you don't have to worry about this property because I know you're worried it's going to go into foreclosure. If that investor says, I'll assume your mortgage, just don't tell the lender that we're doing it. How is that buyer investor going to feel confident that they own the property? It's going to be a quit claim deed. They'll get the seller to sign over a quit claim deed to them, and then nobody says anything to the seller's lender, and that new investor buyer owner just keeps making the payments and the lender never knows. But guess what? That's probably loan fraud. That means 30 years maximum prison sentence. That means $1 million fine. That means Martha Stewart prison in West Virginia. True story. That's where people end up. Okay, So a quit claim deed, that seller's saying, look, let's just get this ownership over to you. I won't tell my lender, whatever. So a quit claim deed could serve a couple purposes. It could also be in the event of a divorce, the spouse who buys out the other spouse. Let's just do a quit claim deed from you to me. I know the history of the property. I was the owner along with you for all those years until we decided to part ways. I'll just sign over my interest to the property to you for X dollars, and I'll sign over a quit claim deed to you. So that's what these various types of deeds look like. Whether there's how much of a warranty or a defense of the title is the seller willing to provide. So that general warranty deed covers both the past, the present, and the future. They're guaranteeing the title forever to forever, from way back forever all the way to infinity and beyond. Buzz Lightyear, 100% guarantee. Here are the guarantees with a general warranty deed, and then we'll call it. This 5 covenants, the first one is called Sizen. And I have to take you back to the medieval days. Think about this image. You're buying property from some lord of somebody or something or other, and they take you to the top of the hill and they point out across the hill and the valley and the trees, and they say, okay, the thing I'm selling you goes from that tree line across over the stream to that other tree line, those pastures and all of that over there. That is sort of the concept of Sizen, identifying what they're selling to you, what they're giving you or selling you with this general warranty deed. This is mine, and I am giving it to you in exchange for this amount of money. That is the covenant of Sizen. The covenant of encumbrances says, hey, it's free of liens. I'm not going to give you a problem child. And if I do, I'll sell it to you for less. But any liens that might be on it, you will be fully aware of. But I promise you it's free of liens. And we'll get them cleared up. If there are some, I'm going to clear them up at closing and you won't inherit them. You won't take them over when you buy it. I'll get them all squared away, cleared up. Covenant of quiet enjoyment protects the property from third party claims. In other words, if anybody comes out of the woodwork and says, I might own the property, I think I have a 10% ownership, then I will help you fix it. And I promise you that's not even going to happen because I've been the only owner this whole time. The covenant of further assurance says, I will help you get things cleared up if needed. I'll track down information, give you all the info that I could possibly give you if you need some help clearing up a title from any sort of a claim against the property in the future. Even after the sale is done, there's the warranty forever. Even after the sale is done. Now, some of this, it might be that seller goes away and dies or gets broke, has no money to help fix things. But that's where title insurance comes in. That title insurance policy helps kick in when the seller is unobtainable or has no ability to fix these things. So that's kind of how this general warranty deed is a thing and is possible to be done. We'll talk more about the other kinds of deeds, but we are done, guys. It's right at 9:30. I'll hang around, but have a great weekend. Let's see. We're going to march on through. Let me show you something real quick. We've got... there it is. Yep. We have done 3. Sorry. There it is. Taxation. We're doing transfer of title. The next thing in line is land use controls. So again, order of syllabus is what we're covering. So 4, and then we'll be into 5, which is actually 6 in the textbook, but it's 5 in the syllabus. So look at the syllabus order, and that's the order we're going in. Look, we still have probably another hour to go in this chapter about deeds. Then we're going to do about 2 hours on land use control, and then environmental will be really quick. And then we're going to get into the meat of the sandwich, because all these first chapters have mostly been pretty easy breezy, but we're about to get in. Let's see. It's going to be, yeah, it's probably going to be Thursday. Wednesday, we're going to clear up these next couple of smaller ones, but Thursday we'll probably be getting into Unit 7, which is brokerage agency, how agents work with clients. And that's the first of the monster chapters with a lot of content. So buckle up, read ahead, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Hey there. Yeah, hang on.